We are live.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the June 15th work session of the Hampton Town Board. Carol, would you please read the roll call?
Councilwoman Burke Gonzalez.
Present.
Councilman Leese.
Present.
Councilwoman Overby.
Here.
Councilman Bragman.
Here.
Supervisor Van Scoyac.
Present. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This morning we'll begin with a public portion where any member of the public may call and give us their comments. And we just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. That'll be followed by several topics. We'll start with bids presented by our Presenting Director, Chief Carosa. Then we'll have a wireless communications update and update on the Springs Fireplace Road corridor study, followed by liaison reports. We do have a few resolutions. So, Michael, without any further ado, I believe we have some callers on the line. Let's hear from the public.
We do. I'll unmute the first caller I see with the last 4 digits, 8764. I'll unmute that now.
Good morning. This is Carol Budo calling from Springs.
Good morning, Carol. How are you?
Good. Can I go ahead now? Last week, the Springs Park Committee Chair, Neil Kraft, told you that about 2 acres was proposed to be cleared. However, the plan prepared by the committee and the Land Acquisition Department actually shows 4.5 acres of clearing to create new grasslands, plus 1 acre of clearing for a new separately fenced small dog area in the Springs Park. That's about a quarter of the current 22-acre fenced park. When added to the existing clearing, the fenced park area would be about 80% open meadow. The entire right side of the park would be grassland, except for a very few large trees. The area of proposed clearing has many native dogwood. Their white flowers are the first colors of spring we see in the park. The area also has holly, some mature specimen evergreens left by the nursery, and loads of wild roses. I've been surprised by the passion that many of the male park users who describe it as paradise or Eden. But a few things are clear. The vast majority love the variety of flora, quiet private trails, and the much-needed shade in the summer. There's a large and growing group of regular park users who want to protect the shade, flora, and current usage of the park. The proposed small dog park within the park is located in an area that will remove much-needed shade and shorten the only shaded path available to walkers on a hot summer day. We feel we weren't represented by Kathy's committee and would like to be part of any recommendations concerning the park before the board takes further action. We also feel that a small dog park is better situated outside of the current fencing or in another location altogether. The town recently created the Buckskill Meadow Preserve. I looked at the photos and management plan and think it's not only a beautiful space of 25 plus acres, but perfect for the creation of a small dog park. There are multiple cleared areas as well as shaded walkways. One of the proposed uses in your plan is for frisbee throwing. Well, lots of people throw frisbees for their dogs. Why not include space for them? Interestingly, the plan calls for outdoor chess tables to be added, which is very nice. But I wonder how many residents have requested this, whereas you have a group asking for a small dog park, and I think that need deserves to be met. I was one of the earliest proponents with Deb Foster for the current usage of the park. There was widespread discussion at that time among many different groups, and the consensus compromise was that Springs Park would be for everyone, that portions would not be fenced off for different purposes, and that it would remain dog-friendly, acknowledging that the fencing gave dog walkers a safe place to exercise. The current usage of the Springs Park should not be confused with what is commonly called a dog park, where people sit or stand as their dogs are confined to an open field. The vast majority of park users do not want that to change. The fact that the park has become one of the most popular in town is a testament to the community consensus that formed it. Sadly, the recent proposed changes have created divisiveness in the community, and that should give everyone pause about proceeding in this manner. Thank you.
Carol, I appreciate you taking the time to call us today and express your views. We did have an initial discussion last week based on representations and recommendations of that subcommittee. And it was really the first opportunity for us to engage directly with the public about those recommendations. And to date, I believe the only consensus that the board arrived on was to ensure that we improve the signage there. And I think we all agreed that the signage recommendations should be immediately instituted. And also the gates. There's some issues with security, and there have been some deer that have gotten into the park and sadly were, I think, mauled to death by dogs within the park. And in order to keep them from getting into the park in the future, having self-closing double gates seems to be a solution that the board, I think, unanimously supported. So those are the only two changes that to date we've, I think, found consensus over. And as far as I'm concerned, personally, I think retaining any native species that are within the park where they exist, and also ensuring that there's shade for those who use the park are really important aspects that you brought up. So, I don't know where we will end up, but we certainly won't make any decisions without having full engagement from the public. I know this is a cherished and beloved park, and we certainly want to make sure that the people who currently enjoy it will continue to enjoy it, and their input's incredibly important to us. Thank you for calling.
Okay, well, I thank you. And as I said, there's a group that would love to be involved if there's more discussion. So I hope that they'll reach out or give us the opportunity.
Yeah, Carolyn, I know there is a Springs Park Facebook group, which I believe was public and has gone private. I had actually tried to join that group, but I haven't been approved to be able to comment yet. So hopefully that will occur, and we'll be able to have full engagement with users.
Okay, great.
Carol, can I
Thank
ask that you forward the names of folks that would like to be that are interested in discussing this, and send me their emails as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've been collecting names and emails, and I have to say, I use the park pretty much every day, and in the winter often twice a day. And everyone that I've spoken to is very concerned about the changes, doesn't want to see changes, so people are very, very anxious to be heard. So we will, is it best to just get a list or to have a statement of what we're concerned about? It's basically what I just said, I think, and we will give that to you. Thank you.
Well, Carol, I would also add that, we would encourage people to email us too with their comments. That's very helpful to us as well. So if people want to be more engaged, they can reach out directly.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Be well. Michael, do we have another caller on the line?
Yes, moving on. The next caller's last four digits of their phone end in 9396. I'll unmute that caller now.
Yes, hello. This is Frank Rena, and good morning, Town Board, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. In March of 2018, yes, hello.
Good morning, Frank. How are you?
In March of, I'm doing good, thank you, and I hope everybody there is doing good also.
Please
in
continue.
March of 2000, am I on delay or something? Because I'm.
There is a slight delay.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you just said.
Please continue, Frank.
Oh, okay, I got it now. In March of 2018, the Town Board passed a resolution to require groundwater monitoring for potential impact from mining and mining reclamation activities, and to hire FPM Environmental to draft such legislation and to provide draft legislation to the town for a cost of $5,000. Resolution RES-2019-380 was adopted on March 7, 2019 at 6:30 in the evening. During the summer of 2018, FPM submitted a draft legislation and they were paid in full the $5,000. Since then, I've made several inquiries concerning the status of the legislation to test groundwater in the mining area, and this is what I've heard back. there has been unexpected changes in the legal staff that has delayed the writing of the legislation. I also heard that the town is somewhat concerned that with the legislation they would be sued by the mining companies, so they're being particularly careful about the wording they use. And then the last thing I heard was that the pandemic has caused delays in writing the legislation. It's now over 3 years since the legislation was adopted and FPM's completion of the report to the town. My question is, when can the community expect the legislation to be completed?
Frank, that's a really good question, and I don't have a firm answer on that. And all the reasons that you alluded to are somewhat responsible for that. But I will also say that the town has actively pursued its objections to the expansion of mining within the town. We've gone to court against the DEC. We've joined into the case with Sandland with our neighbor in Southampton. That's had a very recent and immediate positive result. And, I think that we're in a much better position now moving forward with the whole issue of expansion of sand mining vis-a-vis the potential negative impacts on our groundwater. I do think we needed some clarification on some of the legal issues, and I think that's all becoming much more clear. I could defer to council as to any additional comments regarding legal issues surrounding the mining and where we stand in those cases I mentioned.
Can I just jump in for a minute? I believe I'd have to confirm this, but I believe that the law that authorized us to do that, although it was passed in the Assembly and the Senate, was pocket vetoed by the governor. That's my recollection. I'd have to confirm that. But
no, I believe it was signed.
It was signed? I heard that he didn't sign it.
I believe so.
I believe the initial was actually vetoed by the governor.
Oh, okay, then it came back. Okay.
I think your recollection about that is correct, Jeff. But there have been some very recent developments, and I think that will also inform our ability to move forward on our legislation.
Well, that's terrific to hear. We've been holding, some members of the community are greatly concerned about this, and it's wonderful to hear that the town still has the intention of developing legislation. I've always, each time I address the town board, I always sort of like included my attitude towards this, and that is that this is a legacy issue. This is what we leave the future. Once a natural resource is gone or destroyed, or in this case, could possibly be contaminated, it affects the rest of time and what we leave to the next generation. So we really have to do our best to protect what has been passed on to us so that we can pass it on to the next generation. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss this with you.
Frank, thank you, and we appreciate your passion about keeping our water clean.
Thank you.
Moving on, the next caller on hold, the last 4 digits of their phone end in 0349. I'll unmute that now.
Good morning, everybody. This is Teresa Collins. I'm calling about the Springs Park Committee and the recommendation that was decided to change the signs. I'm kind of urging you quickly to amend that recommendation and preserve the original signs in addition to the new signs, because if you did read the original signs, you'll find a lot of safety considerations are being lost, like no fires, no motorized vehicles, and it would be a shame that a committee that was so gung-ho on creating better safety in the park would allow these activities to be undocumented at the front gate. Furthermore, as you may want to double check, that dense text on those yellow signs is a verbatim transcription from the management plan that was in your packet. So it's not like somebody's cooked these up out of nowhere. It's a continuity of record, and I just urge you to amend your decision to say, you know, you're adding a sign, not changing the sign. And that's about all I have to say today.
Thank you, Teresa. And I'd love to be able to join the Facebook group if that could be approved so that we could have more direct.
Listen, that's, I think, your mistake. Privacy, it was not a punitive thing on the public. In fact, the use of that social media by public officials, appointees, and employees exploded our world in January, pushing us to about a 55% increase in membership and putting us into a category that Facebook treats differently than a small social network. And while y'all were busy with this committee, last week Facebook pushed us to decide whether we would be public or private. The private status should not affect your application to be a member. The private status only means that once you're a member, the public cannot see who is in the group. The postings can be seen by the public, but you know, I did have to pull rank and say I think this group would prefer the world not to comb through the list and do nasty things to them. So it was not what you thought it was. And give it another try, because if you were trying to get on that Facebook group recently, I would have seen that. You know, so just take the private word and back away. Go through with it.
Yeah, I appreciate the explanation about the change you had to make, and I understand why you did it. Thank you for that. And again, I did submit, so I'd love to join and be able to discuss and hear directly from people who use the park, because it's important to us.
Well, since you bring it up, I would love you not to do that and to create a public page, because the burden of this discussion really does rely on, you know, should lie in the public sector. And one of the recurring problems with this committee and others is that we can't even at this moment find where your meetings are. I don't even know when the next meeting of the Springs Park Committee is going to be. So I don't really want to see that information brought into Facebook, because not everybody's on it. But the town site is really where these communications belong.
Well, thank you for your comments, Teresa. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Moving
Do we have
on.
any other callers, Michael?
Yes, we do. Moving on, the next caller's last four digits of their phone end in 3290. I'll unmute that now.
Good morning to all of you. This is Tom Bogdan calling from Montauk, New York.
Good morning, Tom.
Good morning. Good morning. I have a question regarding the May 11th meeting. At that time, you discussed a airport diversion study that was being completed for the town. I'd like a little more information on that, committee. Could you tell me what the status is of that meeting?
So, Tom, we understand that.
That committee.
Tom, we understand that we need to do a diversion study. The town has not yet contracted to do it. It would be one of our next steps. On July 6th, we'll be discussing environmental impacts of the airport as well as underlying zoning. Councilman Bragdon's liaison, and he's heading that effort up. And I guess, I don't know, Jeff, have we made any progress in commissioning a diversion?
Yeah, yes. We've retained HMMH previously, and that's the company that we anticipate will do the diversion study. They're highly regarded, well known on handling airport traffic analysis. So that's in the works.
Is that a local company?
No, it's a national company. It's a very well known, very well known in the airport industry.
Being updated on a regular basis on your progress with that committee, if possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We know it's important,
Okay.
and we know Montauk is concerned. We're very aware of that.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for the information and have a nice day.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks,
You
Tom.
too. Thanks for taking the time to call us today. Michael, do we have any other callers?
Yes, moving on. The next caller's last four digits end in 3843. I'll unmute that now.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Keith Schaefer. Unfortunately, this is not the first time I've had to call in. I'm calling in regards to a dumpster pass. As I'm sure the board remembers, we sent in the first of all, we've been residents of Montauk for 15 years. My father, who owns the property, is an elderly gentleman. We sent in a check for a dumpster pass back in March, middle of March. Here we are in the middle of June. We still have not received it. I was wondering if the town board has had any further discussions on giving us a refund on the dumpster pass that was never received.
So as I've stated previously when you've called, that the town clerk is responsible and has full discretion over the issuance of permits. And that's not a matter that the town board can resolve directly.
Will the town clerk speak on this matter since she's at this meeting, I imagine? How much longer do we have to think that it's going to be delivered by the Postal Service before we could everyone could just admit that it's gone and that we deserve the refund?
Mr. Schaefer, I'll call you on the matter, okay?
Okay.
Thank you for calling, Keith.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get this resolved. Unfortunately, calling in is the only real avenue I have to allow my, frustration to be aired. So this is the only avenue I have.
I understand. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Moving on, the next caller. Yes, the last four digits of this caller is 3259. I'll unmute that now. Hello, caller.
Hello?
With the last. Yes, sir. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Neil Kraft of the much vilified Park Committee. And I want to first say that I thank the board for their time and for listening to us today and last week also. I just want to say that we were just making a list of recommendations that I thought would be taken one at a time and discussed rationally over a period of what I imagine would be a couple of months. We were certainly not a secret cabal sitting around brewing up trouble at the dog park. We all do genuinely believe that all of the changes would be positive for the dog park, and if people don't agree, we're certainly willing to amend those changes. I also want to say that I kind of object to being vilified and called at home by some of the members that have spoken already today. This was a committee meeting that everyone was invited to join. One of the most vocal opponents of our decision was invited to 5 different meetings and didn't come to any of them. And the other one, the second caller, Teresa, I personally asked at the dog park to join, in which time she said to me, I don't believe in government, I don't believe in the town board, they're always up for re-election, I don't believe they can do anything. So I said, you're welcome to join, please let me know. And of course, this stuff happened. So again, my apologies to the board for all the yelling. We definitely intend to work together with Kathy to come up with more palatable suggestions, but I also hope that the really only 3 squeaky wheels that are complaining about our intrusion in the park not speak for everyone else.
Neil, I appreciate that you took on this charge as chair of this committee, and the work that you've put in to make recommendations. And I'm sorry to hear that, you know, you've had a lot of negativity associated with your volunteerism on this particular topic. I know that dog owners are extremely passionate, and especially the ones that use that location. You heard from a number of people the other day and today that, you know, that's a big part of their life. This is where they bring their animals who they love. They're part of their families, and they use this park sometimes 2, 3, 4 times a day. They have social gatherings with other dog owners there. And my experience is that oftentimes people reject any kind of change. I do think there were some very helpful suggestions regarding the park that I think we all agreed immediately that the signage could be improved so that it actually conveys the messages that need to be conveyed. Today, there was a suggestion that we keep the additional previous signage as well. We'll certainly consider that. And we know that improving the gate system, I think, would be supported by everyone who uses the park. Again, I'm sorry that, you know, you were vilified in your words, and that's certainly not the kind of behavior we would ask people to have regarding, especially those who are just volunteering their time and trying to engage with the public so that we can better understand what the needs of the community are. So again, I thank you for your time, and I'm sorry that there's been some negativity attached to your efforts.
Oh, it's no problem, and I really appreciate the calmness which the board has.
Are you still there, Neil, or did we lose you?
Yeah. I just thank you for your time and your patience going through this.
You as well. You have a good day. Thanks for calling in.
At this time, Mr. Supervisor, there are no other callers.
Okay, we can move on with our topics, our agenda topics. And first up, we have Jeannie Carrozza, our purchasing director. Good morning, Jeannie. You have some bids.
Good morning. Yep, I have, first I'll start with the acceptances. The first is printing of miscellaneous forms. Montauk Printing and Effects of Color are the apparent low bidders. Supply and delivery of miscellaneous kitchenware items, Sam Tell and Son for that one. We also did a bid for a police department rooftop access ladder. The apparent low bidder is Loduca Associates in the amount of $40,433. Another printing bid, and that's for police forms and brochures. Montauk Printing, Ridgewood Press, Concept Print, Effects of Color, and the Minds Press are the low bidders for that. An extension of Fort Hill Cemetery interments and maintenance, and that's Allen Burke Backhoe Services. And then we have several notices coming up. For the 17th, we have the auto parts bid, food service and kitchenware items, and then also we're doing an RFP for green heating and cooling East Hampton campaign. And I'll be noticing on the 24th, Phillips property demolition, and that's for land acquisition. And then we're doing an RFP for the architectural and engineering services for the new senior center. And since there won't be a meeting until July 1st after that, I'll be noticing bids for the Accabonac Harbor Rain Garden project. And also we're going to be doing a bid for the Accabonac Solar Farm Pollinator Meadow Garden. And that's it for now.
Any questions for Jeannie?
Busy.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Lot.
Thank you, Jeannie. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
So moving on, our next agenda item is wireless communications update, and we have Elizabeth Harrington-Smith and Susan Raybold from Cityscape, our outside consultants, joining us. Just as a matter of background, the pandemic really, I think, pointed out the inadequacy of much of our infrastructure, whether it be internet or personal wireless services, with thousands of people coming as refugees from New York City to ride out the pandemic here. The existing infrastructure was really overtaxed, and we traditionally have had some dead zones as the industry has sort of advanced piecemeal. with each individual carrier just selecting a site and going through a process of building a tower. In response, we have 4 new towers within town, which are helping to bridge those gaps. But having a comprehensive review of our overall wireless communications in town, we felt was necessary. So I put together a committee. We did actually go out for an RFP and hired Cityscape to present. We know that our code regarding personal wireless services hasn't been updated since 2003, and there have been many, many changes in the industry and requirements and regulations passed by the FCC, which is the federal governing body of communications. And in order to better reflect those changes, we need to do revisions of our code. We have done study of dead zones and know where the coverage gaps are. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Elizabeth Harrington-Smith and Susan Raybould from Cityscape. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. And I'm going to go ahead and share our screen and get started with the presentation. Let's see. And in just a moment to enlarge my screen. Well,
we can see it.
Okay.
See it, I think.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so Cityscape Consultants just works for local governments. We do not work for a wireless service provider. We don't provide a wireless service that people subscribe to. We just work in the niche market of wireless telecommunications, and our goal is to assist local governments with the complexities of the industry. I'm going to start with a brief introduction to wireless telecommunications so that we all have an understanding of the same terminology that I'm going to be using in the presentation. So just a real quick overview of the history of wireless communications. You may be familiar with first generation wireless that started out with this sort of a handbag phone that required the low frequency service. It was an 800 megahertz propagation pattern. And the towers were separated probably as much as 5 miles apart. And when you got outside of that service area, the signal sort of caused your call like an AM or FM radio station to crackly and then it faded out. Then second generation wireless operated in the high frequency megahertz system. And it was a much crisper call. And it started to include a few features that the other handset didn't include, like voice text. And then with 3G, we started with the advent of the smartphones, where when we now have thousands of apps and the use of streaming and television and radio and listening to music and all sorts of things, GPS all on your handset. And that's what's referred to as fourth generation, and fifth generation and sixth generation and seventh generation will all be about the bandwidth that enables all of these Internet of Things and machine-to-machine learning features that the industry will be transitioning to. So just some quick facts to think about is that more and more people have really started to use their wireless handsets more and more. They use them more frequently, most people, than their wireline. And most of Americans, over 50% of the households, have started to cut the cord, 49% in this slide. And if you just look at some of these percentages, it gives you an idea of how many people are relying more and more on their handsets, especially for public safety when driving, and in cases of emergencies, they reach for more times than not, their mobile device if they have them. So the way that these networks function, in order for the handset to work, you have to have signal from antenna that are elevated above buildings, above tree lines, above terrain, the natural earth, in order for the antenna to speak to each other and to the handset. The taller facilities, which you're most accustomed to, are called macro towers and macro wireless cells, and they project the calls out in greater distance. Now that we're needing to have more bandwidth because the apps that we use put a lot of capacity strain on the existing network, the industry is going to start coming in with small wireless facilities. They're less than 50 feet in height. Their antenna is much smaller compared to the macro cell, and they're being used primarily for data purposes, the transfer of data. So the antenna that mount in the air on these structures, the towers that you probably are familiar with are the lattice tower, the monopole, and the guide tower. And those are non-concealed, but you can also have concealed macro towers. This is a faux tree. This is a unipole, which you have near the solid waste management facility. And these unipoles can also be painted different colors. So if you have a situation where you want it to be green or brown or black or blue, you can also have them painted. Now, when the antenna mount onto a structure that is not built for the sole purpose of holding that antenna, so when the antenna goes on something other than a tower, it is called a base station. So for example, this water tank was built not for these antennae to attach to it, although it's great that they can go on there. So this is called a base station. Likewise, utility poles that are constructed for electricity, when the industry goes on top, it's a base station. Rooftops are also considered base stations. These are examples of non-concealed base stations. But you can also have concealed facilities, and you have some concealed and semi-concealed in your community. The antenna on top here are painted to match the building color. You have the faux church steeple, and you have the extension of the, I'm not sure if that, I guess the tower at the church. This is an addition. In these instances, you can't see the antenna, so we consider those concealed. Now, you have some small wireless facilities that have been approved and not built yet. And so you can expect them to look somewhat like this if they're unconcealed in the right-of-way or in a utility easement. If it's unconcealed, you'll see the canister of the antenna at the top and all of the operating equipment on the pole or right next to the pole. But small wireless facilities can also be concealed. In this instance, the canister at the top is blending in with the rest of the structure. All of this equipment that you see, on the pole is actually here at the base of this one. And we consider this also a dual purpose because it's got a banner, it's got functioning lights. If you don't amend your ordinance and put into place regulations, you will have a plethora of these sites along your roadways, similar to what we're seeing in this image, where you have different service providers installing their own pole in the right of way. And actually there's a third one getting ready to go in right here. So when we get to that point of working on your code, we're going to want to make sure that if your goal and objective is not to have them in a line like this along your right of way, that we'll address that. So I want to start with what we've done so far and where we've gotten to with our project. We have a number of steps that we follow, starting with preliminary research, assessment of infrastructure, and we've gotten through all of these down to the the engineering mapping analysis. So let's start with your inventory. We want to get a lot of data, as much data before we go out and assess each of these sites. So we got data from the community, from the town, and from the police department. We got information from the FCC, the actual tower owners, and we mapped all those out. Then Elizabeth and I, came out to East Hampton, and we went to every single site. We took pictures, we documented who was on the facilities, we identified if there were any things at the facilities that needed to be addressed. And then those recorded observations were put into an inventory catalog. The inventory catalog also includes the site ID that corresponds to the maps, the street address, the hamlet. And I want to point out that this inventory catalog is a great tool for you to use so you can help manage co-locations, maintain the towers, and knowing who's where. And this is the most complete inventory that we've ever done because the staff has been so helpful in getting us information. I just want to give a shout out to the staff because we never have this much data on all of our sites. They worked really hard to get us the zoning and the hamlet information and the addresses. And so I'm really excited that we can provide that to you in a complete form. So then after we have those sites collected, we then start the mapping. Now this mapping is not for your community, but I'm going to get to yours in a moment. But we put together a simulated propagation pattern so you can see where gaps are and where your coverage is if all of the service providers were at the same location. Once we have all that, we compare it to your zoning to see if your zoning is creating any gaps or barriers to entry, and then we bring that to you. So I'm going to move on to the mapping, unless you have any questions right now so far. Do you have any questions so far?
My only question, first of all, this is great information. My only one is, this is all up to date, very, as of the last month, I would think, because I saw you had, I think, St. Teresa's Church in there, which is only installed recently. So your inventory catalog is up to current date. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Thank you very much, Susan.
So we show the inventory on 5 different maps. We first look at structure type. You have 49 total facilities. 29 of them are towers and 13 of them are base stations. You have 23 existing towers, 1 that's condemned and is going to be removed. You have 3 approved that are not built yet, and you have 2 that are proposed and under review. Your base stations, of your 13, 10 are existing, 2 are approved but not built yet, and 1 is proposed and under review. The towers on this map are identified by a black dot. The base stations are identified by an open white dot. If they are proposed and not built yet, they're a darker yellow halo. And if they are under review, they are a lighter yellow. 21 has the red around it because that's the one that's condemned and is proposed to be removed at some point. Now we want to look and see how many of these structures actually have personal wireless facilities on them. So while you have 42 sites, not all of them have personal wireless equipment on them. You have 35 of the sites that have macro or will have small wireless. So you have 31 macro cells that are either existing, approved, or proposed, and you have 4 small wireless facilities, none of which have been actually installed yet. The macro cells are shown in the black dot, and the pink purpley dots are your small wireless facilities. We also have an area, you've got a tower farm, a cluster of sites that are in this area with the red, and then you have an inset map that identifies those sites a little better because you can't really see them when they're clustered together. So now we're looking back at the total sites and how they're used. And you have 26 macro, the 4 small that are proposed. You have 2 broadcast facilities. You have 4 public safety sites. You have 5 public safety sites that also have wireless equipment on them, which is a great use of the public safety facilities. Now we want to know where they are with regards to the property or right-of-way that they're on. So the vast majority of your sites in this instance are publicly owned. You've had a great use of public property. That helps you control the deployment. It helps you have structures that are better maintained, and you get some revenue at the same time. So of your 42 sites, you have 15 that will ultimately be on private property, 4 in the right-of-way, 20 on publicly owned property, and 3 in your utility easement. And the ones in the utility easement are predominantly your small wire or some poles in the on the existing utility poles or antenna on the existing utility poles. And then the last snapshot that we want to look at with the infrastructure is what kind of design type do you have? Most of your sites are non-concealed. You do have some concealed and semi-concealed, but most of them are non-concealed. Now, once we have verified all of this information and it's been approved by the town staff, which it has been, and I actually even came out a second time to do some additional verifications, and I took some readings around town to for drive testing. We take all of that information and we put together simulated propagation coverage maps. Now, these simulated maps are, they're using a generic antenna type that's used by a lot of the industry. And we build in a lot of common factors that the industry uses. It's not exact because we don't have the exact power outage, power density, beam tilt that the industry uses, but we want to look at the sites for the personal wireless service facilities. So this map shows all the personal wireless facilities that were on map 2 that have been approved and not built yet or are existing. This map does not include any of the sites that are proposed and under review because we don't know if they're going to get approved or not. So we don't want to show those yet. And this map shows a prism sort of snapshot of the coverage from these existing sites. And we assume that the same service provider is on each and every facility. And we do that because if there's an existing wireless provider on an existing tower or base station, theoretically, they could have space there for another service provider. So the first thing that we want to do is look and see if a service provider went on every single site, would you have any gaps? And you would. So yellow is showing a superior signal that has a strong enough signal to get inside of buildings. The green areas are showing signal strength that is outdoors and would be spotty indoor coverage. The bluish to purple is pretty much only outdoor coverage, not a good chance that you would have indoor or solid outdoor vehicular travel coverage. And then the areas where there is no color shining forth, those are dead spots. And you might get a signal if it's not windy and it's not rainy and it's low humidity. Now, the next map, we turn on a few more sites. And we say, okay, now you do have some sites under review. If they were to get approved, and if you were to use those sites, how much more coverage would you get? So in this map, you see that there is a degradation of coverage here. You have a site that's proposed and under review in that area, and you can see how if it were to get approved and it were to get installed, it would provide a similar, somewhat, similar footprint to what we show. Now, we know that not all service providers are on each one of these facilities. So our next map series is showing you anonymously the simulated footprint for provider A, provider B, and provider C in your community. I'm not going to tell you whose footprint is which, but you can tell that there's some commonalities between them with regards to gaps in coverage. Some of them have areas that are covered a little bit more than others, but the thing that you have to keep in mind is that through the Telecommunications Act, you have to provide equal and unfavored access to each service provider. So you can't look at provider A and say, oh, they've got a much better footprint, and then not be concerned about B or C. You have to allow provider B, who appears to have a smaller footprint in the community, you have to provide them equal access to provider A. And provider A also has to have equal access to provide coverage throughout the entire community. So these are the gaps that you're going to need to look at solving for coverage. Now, this map is showing a little bit enlarged image of provider's B footprint, so you can get a better look at it, and all of the existing but not built yet wireless facilities that are in operation presently. So I think this is helpful so that you can start to get an idea of how the areas are that need coverage. But coverage is only one aspect of network design. You also have capacity. So when you have a large subscriber base using their handsets or their Wi-Fi on their laptops or other portable devices, then this service area actually shrinks, and it can get almost non-existent because they eat up that bandwidth gets used so much that these yellow areas can actually just shrink down to nothing. So we use a heat map that shows a comparison between the population, households, number of households, number of addresses, and a comparison to the amount of infrastructure that's in that area. And we show you in this map the areas that we think that are already or going to have serious capacity problems with the network over the next 10 years. The areas in green are areas that are not on our radar because that's a pretty good ratio number of sites to the subscriber base. But these areas of red, where you may have infrastructure there, but it's not enough because the capacity in that area over the next 10 years is going to be a real problem. Even though you have a number of sites in this area of orange, you can expect more facilities because, again, the capacity is going to be stressed. So the next item I want to talk about are the regulatory parameters. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. I've sort of talked on it already, but it's real important to realize that your ordinance cannot unreasonably discriminate among providers of functionally equivalent services. I spoke about that already. And your ordinance cannot have the effect of prohibiting personal wireless service development, You have to act on requests that come in within a reasonable time period, which has since been defined in a report and order a few years ago. If you provide a denial, it has to be in writing with substantial evidence. And you cannot regulate the environmental effects of the radio frequency emissions beyond what the commission regulates. Now, I know that there are some studies underway presently, but the FCC has not changed any of their reports and the requirements. So you have to continue to follow what the FCC has in place presently. You can require a statement that the facility complies with the commission's regulations concerning RF emissions, but you can't regulate beyond that point. The Middle Class Tax and Relief Act in 2012 in Section 6409A allows the industry to co-locate on existing eligible facilities. So all of those sites that you have on those maps, if they have existing personal wireless facilities on them, and the industry does not exceed the definition of a substantial change, then you are required to allow, you have to approve and not deny the co-location on that site. Now, they do have to meet the definition of substantial change, which means they cannot exceed the height, they can't increase the height of the tower depending on where it is by 20 feet or 10%. They can't expand the compound beyond a certain level. If the site is concealed, they have to maintain that concealment technique. If they can't, then you don't have to allow them to go on there. I'll spend more time on these parts of the project that we're doing when we get more into the ordinance. I'm just sort of giving you a little bit of information now. And the third report and order designates the amount of time that you have to review an application when it comes in. So for a small wireless facility, you have 10 days from the date that it's been submitted to let them know if the application is complete or incomplete. You have 30 days for a macro cell. And then you have different dates that go, you have tolling, so the shot clock will stop and then can restart again depending on the type of facility that's being proposed up until the time it's approved. And you have to follow these or the industry can go to court and complain. But I think you're familiar with how the industry works in that regard already. So, but I'll spend more time on this, but these sorts of timelines have to go into your ordinance, which is why I show this now. So these are some things that we'll be talking about a little bit later. Now, I want to move into our next steps, but before I do you have any questions about anything that I've said so far or about any of the maps that I've shown you?
Questions for Susan?
Well, no, the only thing is the Telecommunications Act in 1996, which is extremely outdated right now. And I know there's a big push to look into it on the federal level. Anything that we should do on the local level would have to mimic that if we went forward. So we might have to amend our code based on the federal code moving forward. Is that correct?
Oh, that's 100% correct. They've already started to dilute that 96 Federal Telecommunication Act. Some of the features that are in that act still apply in the sense that you can continue to regulate the industry, but the federal government's come in and they've started to deregulate what you can regulate. So, but yes, you're absolutely right. And we'll spend a little more time on that with our next steps.
Thank you, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say that, you did a very thorough job giving us a little wireless 101 and then taking us through all the work that you've done, having been out here and mapping, all of the sites, and the catalog inventory is something that, that we can keep up to date. And this is huge for us. This was a major step as we move forward to now that we've really quantified where the coverage gaps are. We can now go and look at town-owned property and see where we can site equipment in order to improve, coverage. And the point that you're saying is that coverage is only one aspect, of the design, that there's obviously a capacity issue too. Because I know before I did Wi-Fi calling, I live in Springs, I used to have to go outside to make calls, and it was better when the leaves were off the trees. It was harder in the summer when more people were out here and there were leaves on the trees. So, we're living that every day. So this is a great big step for us. Thank you.
Sure. And
I just wanted to ask one thing, and maybe this is obvious. These coverage maps that you have now are kind of, they're the first step. They're the necessary groundwork that you have to help us plan where we need new installations. That's correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And I may be getting into your next phase of your presentation. Do you then correlate those locations and the heat map and such, with a geographic map that helps us figure out, where we might need, more installations as we move forward?
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to say that one thing that I forgot to mention is that our mapping and everything that we do with our inventory is all based on a platform called Esri. It's a GIS data tool. And it's the same platform that that the town uses. So we will be sending these map files back to you so that you can have them as part of the layers. So so you can pull this information up and look at it at a more, at a closer level.
More granular.
So it lets us, this is really how we would begin to fix the problem. That would be the tool that we would use to begin.
Right. Yes. That was the impetus for conducting the study. That was the impetus to hiring a Cityscape and to get a comprehensive look at our coverage and where the shortfalls are. And again, it's not just coverage, it's capacity. We certainly saw the impacts of having our population swell during the pandemic and everybody working remotely and live streaming entertainment really had a pretty devastating effect on our capacity. So,
and it's part of the reason we moved, our meetings, our Thursday night meetings, to Thursday day, because LTV couldn't guarantee that we would have, stable coverage, because so many people, when they get home from work, are now streaming entertainment.
And also, when telecommunications industry right now with those shot clocks, which might change, we've lost a couple federal suits right now for those shot clocks being expired because we don't have necessarily this groundwork that's laid out. And it's taken a while to get here, but Peter, the actions, you're moving this forward right now. This is a very well-informed presentation for the public, and it's easy to digest. We all know there's a need in certain areas. I would love to know who provider C was in Springs.
Probably can figure it out.
We know where the areas are, but this lays the groundwork to keep moving forward for to better our telecommunications. So, sorry, that's all I have.
Thank you, Susan. If you want to continue, please go.
Sure. So the next step is to get information from the community on how they might want to fill in these gaps in terms of what the structures would look like, how they might fit in. And so we created a survey or a poll, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask Elizabeth to pull hers up now. And I'm going to walk you through the current draft of the poll that we would encourage you to circulate amongst the community and give them a couple of weeks to, answer the survey, and then we'll tally that up, those survey responses up, and it'll help guide the draft changes in the ordinance. So the first thing that we want to do is talk about, who's filling out the survey. Are they a town resident? Are they a full-time resident, part-time? Are they a business owner? We also want to know, where are they? Do they reside in which hamlet do they reside in, which hamlet do they work in. And then we want to ask them, which wireless service provider do they have? And then we leave an opportunity for them to say, no, they don't own a wireless service device. Then we want to know how many devices are in their household. The reason this is important is because it used to be you had one central line into your home, maybe you had a second line. And now, take my family, for example, we're a family of 6. And no longer do we have one central line into our household. We have 6 phone numbers that come into our household. And so we want to, that this question helps us to sort of qualify capacity. So we want to take this information and compare it to the capacity map, heat map that we've done to sort of use it as a check and balance to what we've put on the map. And then we want to find out, how is their network coverage? They pick the network coverage from where they reside, network coverage, where they work, and how they travel from point A to point B. How does their network coverage? We want to know how often do they use it? Do they rely on it to a great extent, or do they not rely on it very much at all? That helps us determine how important, the network is to the people that are in the town. Then the quality of the service, how important is it to the citizenry? And then we want to know, well, if it's important, how do you use it? How are you using your wireless device? And then we have a question asking, because we're trying to now find out about, okay, if the network is important or is it not important? And if it is important to you, what's more important? Is excellent connectivity most important, or is minimal visual impact more important? And then we have the next question that talks about whether or not they have any concerns about the safety of the facilities. Now we get into sort of a catalog pick of what types of facilities they prefer. So for example, if let's say we've had communities that the majority of people all want monopoles. And if that were the case, then in the ordinance, we could list that as the preferred type of facility that were to get built from here on out. But we've also had communities that have come in and say, oh no, we all like the lattice tower. So every community is different. This allows us to take some of this information and put it into your code that's specific just to you. Then we ask them the same question about the concealed facilities. So we get an idea of what they like or don't like in terms of the concealed, and then we do similar for the base stations. And again, all this information would come in and get moved into your code, and then similar questions for the small wireless facilities. Then we want them to rank a preference of their preferred facilities. Do they prefer new towers, or do they prefer antennas on existing structures? That would help us in the hierarchy of preferences based on the information that comes back. And then we have another question about the small wireless facility and 5G being placed in close proximity to residences, and if there's a concern. So we're wanting to hear back from the community about their concerns, if they have any about 5G. And we have another question about 5G with regards to the potential health impacts. And then we invite them to leave any comments or suggestions. Their name is optional and their email is optional, but they are limited to one response, I believe, per email address. So this information, we're hopeful, will help guide the structure of your ordinance. And once we have all that information, we will put it together and provide you a draft document of the wireless master plan. And then you can start playing around with all that information and deciding how you're going to use it in your community.
We look forward to polling the community. We were very successful in getting responses with the recent police reform poll. And I think we'll try to, put this out in the same manner across our social media, our various committees, and encourage our townspeople to respond so that we have a better idea as to what the community wishes in terms of wireless services moving forward.
So if I could just say, according to process, this poll was drafted by Cityscape. It went to the Wireless Communications Committee. They gave their input. It then went back to staff, because folks in the town attorney's office and planning department have been meeting with Cityscape every week for the last couple of months to get this presentation where it was today. And we're also looking at translating the poll into Spanish. But I think before we want to do that, if the board members could just take a look at the poll in the next couple of days and just see if they have any comments or changes that they'd like to recommend so that we can get this finalized and get this out. And I think, Susan and Elizabeth, you had mentioned that like 2 or 3 weeks was like the ultimate time frame for having it out there.
Yeah, you don't want to have it out too long because then people will sit on it and not do it. So you want to make sure you have a time limit, but 2 to 3 weeks definitely gives everyone enough time to get it.
Yeah, and thank you, Kathy, for pointing that out. I know that you're very familiar with it as you've been involved with many of these meetings. And I just want to take an opportunity to thank Arthur Melman, who's chaired our wireless committee, as well as JP Foster, Biddle Duke, Eliza Hertz, who are community members, and Eric Shantz and Eddie Schnell, who are both our resident town employee experts in the field, Eric with planning and Eddie Schnell in communications. We also had meetings that were attended by Lisa Perilli and Tom Hill with law there, and also the Vincent Messina with the East Hampton Village has also participated. So I want to thank you all. Great presentation, and again, board members, look over the poll. We'd like to get that out very soon. And there will be there's more work to do, obviously, in identifying locations. One of the advantages to identifying town-owned properties for future cell towers is that we have more leeway and discretion as to how those sites develop than if it was an application on a private property. And I think that's an important consideration. There are limitations as to the imposing any kind of restrictions and whatnot because of the FCC regulations, but that would give us a bit more authority than private property development. And also, I know that we'll be reviewing and making comprehensive changes to our wireless code. So we'll have a future work session and be discussing those proposed changes in the near future.
Can I ask, well, one thing, this was a really great summary of issues that we've been dealing with over a long period of time, and it's put it all into one bucket so we can kind of look at it and assess it in a really professional way. Thank you. The other issue is, how are we going to distribute the survey once we finalize it? Are we going to just keep it on our website? We're going to have people, are we going to try to distribute it through memberships and volunteer committees that we have, CAC meetings, that kind of, and what number do you think we need to have back to us that is a good representation of the community? Those are my questions.
I think
we encourage you to, I'm sorry, Kathy, why don't you go ahead and address?
I was just going to say, I think we would be satisfied if we came back with the same kind of numbers as we got with the police reform. I think we had over 1,100 responses and over 900 completions. I mean, I think that would be I believe that's what you said, Peter, as well, correct?
Right. Yeah, and I think that gives you, statistically valid responses that you can extrapolate, where the community stands if you get to numbers like that.
So that would be, is that typical from other communities that you've worked with that are of our same size? That 1,100 would be something to help us move forward with getting those responses?
We have not had a community have that kind of response yet. It would be wonderful if we had. So I look forward to seeing the response from East Hampton. We've had, let's see, the most recent one that we did was for the city of Fort Collins in Colorado, and they had just under 400 responses, or about 425 responses.
So this is a pretty active community, and they let their feelings be known, and which is a pleasure, and also can be, somewhat of hard to handle sometimes. So I hope we get that many responses. I think it's important for us moving forward that we do it the right way. And so again, I think this presentation, and I'm assuming it's going to be on our website, that we can now just push the presentation out to the community through our own, volunteer groups that we are associated with. So anyway, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been very helpful.
Any other questions before we move on?
Yeah, just my last comment. I know we started working on this, a while back, and Eric Chance was there assisting. As we continue to move forward, I would just like to continue looking into the cell phone, the registry aspect of this also, and how we might be able to change that in the code, and might be a good way to look into other, non-taxable revenue, and also might even assist the applicants, when it comes to cell phone and telecommunication needs then too. So if we can continue looking at that, that'd be great. But the presentation is spectacular. Thank you again, Peter.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Susan. It's great to have you here today. And Eddie and Eric, who in the committee were very, very helpful.
Yes, thank you. And I can't commend your staff enough. They've been so wonderful to work with. They've been super informative. They've been very responsive. Everything we've ever asked, like, we could really use this information. They worked so hard to get it to us. So kudos to them. They've been wonderful to work with. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. And I think we do have a great team. At this point, we have a couple callers on the line. I'd like to take those public comments before we move on to our next agenda item, which I think will also be fairly extensive. So again, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here today, and we look forward to seeing you back again for the code revisions.
Peter, do we want Elizabeth and Susan to stay on in case those calls are?
Yeah, let's ask you to stay on. We may have something that comes up that we may ask you to help us with.
Sure.
Thank you for that, Kathy. That's a good idea.
Peter,
so Michael,
yes, we have one caller on hold. I'll unmute that caller. The last four of their phone is 0410. I'll unmute that now. Just give me one more second. Sorry, everybody. Hello, caller with the last four digits ending in 0410. Are you there?
Perhaps they were listening in to the conversation via call-in.
I can't seem to activate their line. We'll have to move forward without the caller, unfortunately.
I hope they didn't have bad cell service.
Nope, they just hung up. If they call back, I'll let you know.
All right, very good. Okay, at this point then, I would like to move on. Thanks again, Elizabeth and Susan, for joining us today. Great presentation, and we look forward to continuing our work together with you.
Thank you so much.
So next up, we have an update on the Springs Fireplace Corridor Study. And with us today, do we have Lisa LaCourie?
They're joining right now, yes.
Great. And Peter Flinker from Dodson and Flinker. And I believe Ray Tobias, is Ray also joining?
Ray is joining right now too. Just one second.
Okay. We'll wait just a moment for him to be able to log in. Kathy, you want to just give just a little bit background on the corridor study as we wait for Ray to log on?
This came out of the Hamlet study, and we launched it in February of 2020. We got the big public meeting in at the library and just before everything shut down, right at the end of February. And it's an intensive evaluation of our traffic, land use, and the environmental issues affecting the Springs Fireplace Road and the surrounding areas that we've defined.
Just give a little bit background on the
Excuse
corridor.
me, everybody. Sorry about that. Ray, that was Ray's audio. I just muted him. Ray, you had a little feedback. If you could lower the audio of the broadcast in your room, that would be great. Sorry, Kathy.
No worries.
Go ahead.
Are we good? Okay, so what I was just saying is that this came out of the Hamlet studies, and it's an intensive evaluation of the traffic, land use, and environmental issues affecting Springs Fireplace Road and the surrounding area. We launched this in February of 2020. We got our public meeting in at the end of that month, where we all had the charrettes at the library. And prior to that, earlier in that day, we met with different interested parties, property owners and business owners, the CACs, the interested community members. And we had gotten an update a few months back, and we just felt it was time for another update so that we can, there are some things that the board needs to weigh in on, and then the consultants can continue to move this forward. And so I guess it is, Peter, are you the starting point here today?
Yes, I am.
Beautiful, thank you.
Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, great to be back.
Hi, Peter.
So let me just check, Ray, you're good to go as well?
Yes, I'm good to go. I don't know why my video is not on, but my audio, it definitely is.
Excuse me, this is the
And I
director. Yes,
think I
Ray,
just
you're,
found
there
out
you go.
why I'm coming on now.
Good job.
All right, beautiful.
Very good. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we have a hopefully fairly brief PowerPoint to share with you, but it's full of interesting information. And here it is. You can all see this?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Very good. So so this is an update, sort of where we've been through the last year and a half almost since this project was conceived. As you know, the study area includes sort of a larger context of Spring Fireplace Road from 3 Mile Harbor Road in the west to Accabonac Road to the east, and then up to Abraham's Path. As Kathy said, it's an outgrowth of the East Hampton Hamlet studies. We completed sort of report revisions in 2019, and those were adopted by the town board in, I think, about a year ago in May 2020. And so this is an outgrowth of that. Part of the Hamlet studies were a series of conceptual plans. I mean, these were sort of more looking at future alternatives than coming up with particular decisions. But I think a key outcome of that was really thinking about the area, especially the sand pits, and what those could be in the future. And so we came up with, through the sort of public charrette process, a series of alternatives and ideas. But basically the big idea is to plan intentionally about what those will be in the future after the sand mining is done, and to think about how the current mix of businesses and homes can and should change over the future to really maximize the potential of this area. Several of the action strategies that were identified at sort of conclusion of the plan as it was adopted is to maintain the existing zoning for the time being, to look at creating a special use within the zoning tables for contractor vehicles, and to select appropriate areas for contractor vehicles parking and storage, to conduct a more detailed comprehensive traffic study of the corridor and recommend improvements. That's what Ray's going to talk about. To look at improved pedestrian safety, to look at improving the visual quality and function of the streetscape and sort of mitigate the cumulative effects of different uses, current and future. And then to really look at how can we protect the natural environment and the historic character of the town as we're sort of cleaning up the area and making changes into the future. So that's really what our update is going to be about. As you recall, part of this was to estimate what the future potential growth is in the corridor. So we did a series of maps and studies, overlays to understand what's already been built and what could be built under the current zoning, and what the sort of constraints in terms of access and area and environmental constraints might be. We did this map last year, sort of so-called build-out status map, which is really looking at, if you take the existing zoning, how much build-out or future development potential is there? So we subtracted lots that have already been developed, which are in different shades of purple. We looked at permits that had already been approved but not built, or in the works and not yet built, and those are in red. And we came up with about 275 acres, which is in yellow, are parcels which still could be developed for some future use. I must emphasize is that a lot of this, especially the sand pits, there's no plan to develop them anytime soon. From what we understand, the owners expect to continue mining and other activities on those parcels for the foreseeable future. So again, this is thinking in a sort of an imaginary way, what is the ultimate future development potential? So ultimately, it's about 182 parcels, most of them fairly small, except for a few large parcels that are part of the mining operation. So then what we did is overlaid what you could do under the current zoning now, and what you see on this map is sort of an illustration of how much potentially could be developed. And that includes about 110 residential lots, which are already in place or could be subdivided under the current zoning. Again, there are no plans that we know of to develop any of these, but they could theoretically be developed under the zoning. There's a 50-unit affordable housing project, which is just north of the sand pit, and this is currently in the works. And that's a town-sponsored affordable housing project. And then within the larger sandpit areas, these could theoretically be subdivided by putting in an interior roadway and subdividing individual parcel lots, probably something like 25 or 30 subdivision lots that could be then sold off to individual builders or companies that wanted to build a facility under the current commercial industrial zoning. So we didn't take each parcel and specifically figure out exactly how much could be built, but we took a sort of the theoretical 120 acre core of the site, which under the current zoning you could develop 75% lot coverage, and even accounting for roads and parking and so on, it easily could be 1.75 million square feet of commercial industrial use. So that was the conclusion that we came to last year. And since that time, we've been sort of working with Ray and Lisa to think about what's the traffic implications of that and how can we mitigate the impacts of future growth and development, as well as the traffic impacts. So Ray's going to talk a little bit about where they stand with the traffic study.
Thank you, Peter. You went through those at a nice brisk pace. I think we're going to slow down a bit just to recap some of the work we've done since we last gathered with the board, and that was early September 2020. So we were in a situation where we had to develop future traffic volumes, and we're in a situation where we had COVID upon us. So we actually, and I'm going to go through these one by one, these are items that we discussed with you that we were going to do and that we've completed. So the first thing is come up with a procedure to get the no-build traffic volumes. And when I say no-build, that means no widening of any intersections, with one exception, which I'll get into in a minute. But we're looking on this study to go out 20 years to the year 2040, at least from when we started. So it's a pretty long-term episode or procedure to develop those traffic volumes. So we're in a situation where we had a pandemic. We actually came up with a procedure, how to develop those 2040 traffic volumes, what traffic volumes to use as existing in the year 2020 when we knew the volumes were temporarily down and actually bouncing back, but not certainly consistent with prior years. So we developed a procedure, and what it ended up being was consistent with New York State DOT guidelines, which were issued just before we met with you. And they said, basically, if you had a traffic count within the last 5 years before the onset of the pandemic, you could use that with growth factors that DOT had developed. We actually did have counts at a study that was done in the area, which involved intersections. And intersection traffic volumes are very critical because that's how traffic capacity works. You look at intersections, turning movements at the intersections. The volumes on the roads in between those intersections are not as critical because there's no restriction to traffic flow. So we had 4 study intersections, which I'll talk about in a minute. So in order to develop those traffic volumes, when we went to the year 2020 from the information we had from 2017, we said we're going to include traffic from those identified private developments at the time when we started in 2020 that had significant traffic generation. And there are 4 of them that had significant generation that should be considered beyond normal traffic growth every year. So there's a normal growth factor of normal growth every year, and then there's those developments which have more traffic, which need to be looked at separately, and that traffic added to get the 2020 no-build traffic volumes. We then moved on to the third bullet there. We developed intersection capacity analyses for the years 2020 and 2040 under the no-build conditions, and I'll describe what that involves on the next slide. And then we identified, based on that analysis, roadway improvements, which were consistent with those permissible in the town. And when I say that, we know that for the past, at least for the past 25 years, the town, in terms of making improvements at intersections, has always considered left and right turning lanes added at the intersection. No addition of any additional travel lanes or widening of roads for any appreciable distances other than at those critical intersections. And we know that no traffic signals are allowed within the town. That's at least been town policy for a couple of decades. However, we can consider roundabouts, which are not traffic signals and which do not typically stop traffic and cause traffic backups. So they're a way to accommodate traffic without having a traffic signal. So we identified those roadway improvements, and then what we said was, okay, we know we need to make some improvements at the intersections. We have identified those improvements. What additional capacity or what's left? Is there any additional traffic that can be accommodated? That additional traffic would be that traffic generated by future developments in the study area. Next slide, please. So these are the steps off our list that we talked to you about last September, which are remaining. And those are identifying improvements which should be implemented in the short-term year, which is 2030. That's basically saying, what improvements do we have in 2040 should be accommodated in the first 10 years versus waiting until the second 10 years. So we haven't determined that yet because that's not a very difficult item, and it's subject to future comment here on the 2040 improvements. And then develop a list of funding sources. That the funding sources constantly change. You know, there's an infrastructure bill being considered in Washington. So we'll update that and then say some improvements need to be made, who's paying for them, and where can the funding be possibly obtained through municipal sources. Next, please. Just an update on some county DPW, Department of Public Works, projects in the study area. On Springs Fireplace Road, currently under construction, I'm sure you're all aware of that. The current construction completion date, and this is actually verified as of this morning, it's still the end of next month. That's the date when the contractor is supposed to be totally finished with work. The final paving is the remaining work task that needs to occur, and that should start soon in order that they be complete by the end of July. On North Main Street and 3 Mile Harbor Road, which is County Road 40, there's a project that the county is undertaking. It slipped a bit in schedule. It was supposed to be, I believe, under construction now. It's been pushed back due to funding issues. Construction is not scheduled now to start until 2024. So the county has told us that they'll be reaching out to the town with proposed plans for comment next spring. Next, please. So these are the 4 critical intersections in the study area. And maybe, Peter, if you can just move your cursor over the numbers as I talk about them. Number 1's at the bottom of the photo. That's the main intersection of 3 Mile Harbor, Springs Fireplace, and North Main Street. If you go to the upper left corner, that's intersection number 2. And basically these intersections box the study area that we're looking at. Number 2 is the intersection of 3 Mile Harbor Road and Abraham's Path. And then if you move to the right, numbers 3 and 4 are very close together because they're the 2 intersections of Abraham's Path with Springs Fireplace Road. So those are the critical intersections that we established at the beginning of the study, and these are the ones we're going to take a close look at. Next, please. So when I talk about intersection capacity, it's expressed in a term called level of service. And the simplest way of trying to relate to the average person what this means is a report card. And, we've used this term before. And when you say a report card, you get a grade, and that's the left-hand column, which shows levels of service, a grade of A through F. So if you think back to school, or if you're currently pursuing higher education, you have a level of service A, which is excellent, very similar to a grade you would get. C is kind of an average grade. D is a level of service which results in long delays. But on Long Island, and it's accepted that level service D is tolerated in peak hours. And when I talk about peak hours and intersections, we always express capacity in terms of the peak hour that we're looking at and this being for the entire week. So we determined from prior counts that the Friday evening period in the area between, say, 5 and 6 p.m., very close to that, is the critical hour for this entire study because that's when the most traffic occurs. Level service D, as I said, is accepted on Long Island for design of projects in the future. Level service F is failure with extreme delays, and there's a level service that you wouldn't get on a report card. It's in E, which says the intersections approaching capacity, delays can be very long, conditions are somewhat unpredictable because you're trying to force the maximum traffic through the intersection. In the last column on the right is expressed the delay in seconds per vehicle at an unsignalized intersection. So what that means is if you go down to level service C, it says the average delays are 15 to 25 seconds. That means if you're waiting at an intersection that's controlled by a stop sign and you're trying to make a left turn, that you would wait on average in the peak hour between 15 and 25 seconds. And as you can see at the bottom, level service F is greater than 50 seconds of delay. Next, please. So this is a bit of a complicated chart, or there's a lot of information expressed here. So I'll try to just express the key results, which are highlighted in yellow. This chart represents the critical intersection capacity results. So it's the 4 intersections. Again, it's during the weekday evening peak, which happens to be on a Friday. In the left-hand column, where it says intersection, those are the 4 intersections I talked about, numbered 1 through 4. The first group, the chart is divided into 4 general vertical sections. The first is 2020, you see at the upper left. And those results that are shown below are for the year 2020, and including the developments which I mentioned have significant traffic generation and normal traffic growth. The second group of columns is the one we focus on because we're looking at design in the future and what needs to be done to accommodate traffic in the year 2040. So the 22nd group, column grouping there, the 3 columns in the second vertical section of the chart, talk about the year 2040 under existing roadway conditions. And when I say existing roadway conditions in 2040, they would include the 2 county projects because they will happen before the year 2040. So the intersections, when we look at them in 2040, will already have those county improvements. Each portion of the chart, and I've highlighted the again in yellow, the LOS, or level of service, displayed and highlighted in each section. The delay numbers in the other column are not significant for our discussion today. But you can see, looking down in that second vertical grouping, that you have 3 levels of service F, which are extreme delays. And I'm sure you know from traveling through the area, the first intersection, the 3-way intersection there of the county roads, you have very, very long delays on Springs Fireplace Road trying to make a left turn to come out onto North Main Street. And you have traffic diverting elsewhere because of that. Springs Fireplace Road intersections at Abraham's Path, the north and south intersections, have level service F delays for vehicles trying to make left turns off of Abraham's Path onto Springs Fireplace Road. And that's even after construction occurs. So the next grouping of columns, or the third vertical section of the chart there, shows that when we looked at the improvements that could be done at those intersections that are in accordance with what's allowed in the town, we actually get very good results. We get those Fs become B, B, and C, respectively. So we have a significant improvement in level of service. In the final vertical section, we're now looking at what traffic could ultimately be accommodated with the improvements that we looked at with additional development. So that's the reserve or remainder of the capacity of the intersection that would be attributable to developments that we would expect to occur or are trying to plan on occurring in the next 20 years beyond 2020. So what we did is we maxed out at level service D. You see that the top 2 locations, which are the main intersection of the county roads, we went to level service D, and then we said how much extra traffic can be accommodated. And likewise for the other intersections. Springs Fireplace Road at Abraham's Path, both intersections don't get to D because the critical intersection is really the first one, because that has the most volume, as you well know. There's the most traffic trying to get in and out to the area through that intersection. And then the last column that's not highlighted gives you the list of improvements that are proposed there to accommodate traffic in the future. And three of the intersections have roundabouts. And I'll go into that coming forward on the next couple of slides. So we can bring up the next one. First, before we do that, when I talked about the excess traffic per hour, how much traffic is that? How many cars or vehicles can you accommodate at the intersection? So the first grouping at the top there, which says total entering and exiting traffic in the weekday evening peak hour. So entering the entire study area, you would have 201 cars that could be accommodated in the year 2040. These are additional traffic volumes that can be accommodated from new development. Exiting the area in the Friday evening peak, 136. There's different capacities for different times. And then in the next section below, it's got a long title, but it says entering and exiting traffic at the same time at the critical intersection. That's the three-way intersection with the two county roads. And that intersection we've estimated takes 80% based on traffic counts. 80% of the traffic coming in and out of the study area goes through that intersection. So if you take the two numbers at the top, take 80% of them, that's the entering and exiting traffic into the area in the evening peak hour that can be accommodated. So those are the numbers that we're looking at in terms of the amount of traffic that can be generated by new developments. Before we go into further discussion, I believe the next slides have some blow-ups of the actual contemplated improvements at the intersections. So the first one is, of course, the three-legged intersection. It does have Indian Hill Road on the opposite side of the county roads. What I mentioned before is that we have a roundabout. So we have a roundabout in the center of the intersection. It's a single lane roundabout, except on the west side, we need 2 lanes. So it's a little bit of an offset roundabout. Back when we did the Hamlet study, we discussed the possibility of a roundabout, and we didn't develop the plan as good as we have now in terms of scale. The county was telling us, though, that they had their own plan just to channelize the intersection, make it easier to make turns, but it really didn't improve capacity. So we actually have discussed with the county recently, within the last couple of weeks, plans for this intersection, because they'll be looking at it in the 3 Mile Harbor Road project, which is not under construction, and which they will be coming to the town board for comment next spring. We shared this with them. I will mention too that there is a triangular piece of land that, if you is shown in faint white light there. So the land in between 3 Mile Harbor and Springs Fireplace Road is actually preserved parkland. The plan, or the idea with this plan, is to remove the existing pavement on Springs Fireplace and 3 Mile Harbor close to the intersection. So that pavement there that you can see in between the proposed pavement on both roads, that pavement would be removed and come out. So there will be a need to just encroach a little bit on that preserved land. It's a process can be done, which the town has utilized before, called parkland alienation. It requires action in Albany to do it. In this case, we would be looking to encroach upon a small piece of the parkland, but the mitigation or the offsetting factor would be that we would put back more vacant land by removing the pavement that's existing, or a lot of the pavement that's existing. So it would be a positive trade-off in terms of the area that's involved in preserved land. So it would be an offset to that encroachment. Next, please. Abraham's Path is an intersection that does not require a roundabout, even with future traffic volumes. It does require a second lane on Abraham's Path, so there would be a separate left and right turning lane. And we've shared this plan with the county also. I don't think it's a much of a effort for them to include it in their project. It's not really much in terms of construction costs to incorporate this. Next, please. Okay, this slide has the two roundabouts at Abraham's Path, the two intersections with Springs Fireplace Road. Here we have a situation where we have preserved and protected land that's crosshatched. You can see it around the borders of the roadway. We wanted to stay away from that because it could be a significant impact in terms of area. But we also we're trying to stay away from the existing wetlands, which are identified by the crosshatched blue shaded areas, in particular on the corner parcel. That corner parcel has basically, it's an informal wetland. It's a drainage area that's not really preserved or improved. So the roadway pavement that's shown stays away from those areas, but there's a requirement to stay 100 feet away from a wetland. So the improvement here would incorporate formalizing that wetland area, installing plantings, anything that DEC would like to see to improve that situation. You can come within 100 feet of wetlands as long as you do some improvements to mitigate that impact, and coming up with plantings that include non-invasive species and other things of that nature would be a benefit to the encroachment on the 100-foot area. Now, I should mention that on that site is a cell tower and a building to service the cell tower. So we're not talking about an active development or any known plans for that to expand and change hands. It apparently, is going to stay a cell phone site for quite some time. Okay, so I think that concludes what I have, and then on to Lisa.
Right, but before we do that, I just wanted to sort of talk about the intersection, if you forgive me, the intersection between the sort of future growth potential and the understanding of traffic capacity that Ray just described. So if we go back to the sort of potential build-out map, we have something like 110 potential buildable lots with single-family homes. We have the 50-unit affordable housing project. And then if you take just a portion of what's possible, say 1 million square feet out of something that could be as much as 1.75 million square feet of commercial and industrial uses on the gravel pits. If you take that through sort of trip generation calculations, what you see is there's not much, or we go well beyond the capacity of the intersections. So basically each single family unit generates 1 trip at the peak hour. The multifamily units generate less, probably 0.4 or 0.5 trips per hour. So you see for the residential, we get 110 trips plus 20 to 25. For if we take 1 million square feet of commercial industrial growth, the trips generated by that are 0.4 trips at the peak hour for each 1,000 square feet of development. So if we have, for argument's sake, 1 million square feet of potential development, that generates 400 trips at the peak hour. So if you combine the commercial, industrial, and residential growth potential and generate the trips at the peak hour, it adds up to 535, and then times 80%, which is the amount of that traffic which is going through the North Main Street, Springs Fireplace Road intersection, you get 428 trips going to that intersection at the peak hour. So under Ray's calculations, however, even if you make all of the improvements with roundabouts that are possible to improve the function of those intersections, you can build an additional capacity of, I think, 109 trips, sorry, at that critical intersection. So before it goes back down toward, D and E and F. So it's 100, if you make the improvements, you can accommodate an additional 109 and it will still function pretty well. The trouble is the potential development is, well, as you see here, 4 times that. at 428 trips. So that's the essential sort of conclusion and conundrum going forward, is how, even if we make all those improvements, we still have more growth potential in the area than those intersections can accommodate. But we have some time. I mean, these residential projects are not going to get built out all at once. They may not all be built out ever. Especially the larger capacity of commercial industrial development is primarily in the existing gravel pits, which have a current use, which is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. Those plans, or the original plan from 1979 for the larger gravel pit was I think a 60-year plan that was 75 to 2035. So there's an additional, 14 years before that plan of mining is completed. They plan to bring it all to a level of 20 feet above sea level, and then to build perhaps an industrial park. So there's still time to plan for the future. So the question is, what kinds of mitigation measures could be put in place, both for traffic and for the environmental impacts as that process moves forward, so that we sort of maintain decent conditions at the intersection, but also improve conditions generally for people in the neighborhood from a perspective of environmental protection, protecting groundwater and quality of life. So Lisa's going to talk a little bit about the sort of mitigation measures for some of those environmental impacts.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, so this is one of the largest areas of commercial industrial development in all of the town, regardless of build out. And one of the major takeaways from the public workshops last February was the concern over dust and dirt being generated by the uses themselves, the industrial uses, mining, and also what's getting tracked out onto the highway by trucks, making the roads dirty, unsafe, unsightly, and then the health hazards associated with dust and dirt getting airborne. So one of the things that we know that is happening right now is the town highway department is doing regular and kind of stepped up sweeping and cleaning of Springs Fireplace Road right now because of the conditions. There is something that Town Councilwoman Kathy Burke-Gonzalez has been looking at with the town attorney's office, in that there's county legislation already on the books that prohibits the deposit of waste materials, including dirt, sand, gravel, building materials, et cetera, from all county highways. And as you recall, Springs Fireplace Road, 3 Mile Harbor Road are both county roads in this area. So we've got a law on the books. How could it be enforced in the town? It's something that the town attorney's office is looking at as to what would be required to enable East Hampton town officers and the Justice Court to enforce a county legislation. That's section 433 of the county code. Similarly, the town could consider adopting their own legislation. Southampton has some that would be prohibiting the deposit of dirt or gravel onto all roads. But remember, that would really only apply to non-county roads or town roads, right? And so that would be something that could be good town-wide to structure. But you'd also want to look at what you would be doing for county roads. And another thing that you could do in conjunction with legislation is work with best management practices for the existing uses. And if you end up having a violation of a legislation that might be adopted, that could be something that would be required best management practice. So we've got some examples of it. If we could look at the next slide. One is a rock rumble that the trucks would drive across before getting out onto the adjoining county road, and a lot of the dirt and the mud that's on their tires would kind of fall off before they get onto the roadway, and that helps before you get there. Then next slide, please. These are examples on the top here. It's a portable mat called a FOD, a foreign object debris system. So when the trucks drive over it, again, some of the debris that's in their tires would fall out before you get to the adjoining road. And the bottom left is a wheel wash system that the trucks would be driving through and would clean their wheels before getting onto the road. And the lower right depicts another system, pretty simple, just laying down of gravel between where your site is in the back there. You see the brown is the site, which might be unpaved dirt. And then the trucks would have to drive over the gravel before getting onto the roadway, and that would help clean them. The next slide, please. Here's just a close-up again of that map, that FOD map. And then another simple thing is just it's just another sort of covering that trucks would have to drive over. Rather, it would help keep them from entraining the waste on their wheels before they get out onto the road. Next slide, please. Here's a detail of a green wheel wash system. It doesn't have to be a big system that's out of keeping with the town or with what the uses are there, and it can recycle the water that's being used. Next slide, please. And then for the sites themselves, it could be as simple as just watering the sites to keep down the dust, or to use vegetation as a physical barrier between the site and the public roadway, or seeding and planting areas not in use. Cover them with gravel, marl, or pavement. There are really many alternatives, and we're not going to list them all here, but there could be site-specific solutions that are applied given what the exact problem is that could be looked at. And you could review the best management practices with the landowner to come up with what the best thing is. Next slide, please. Another major takeaway was the concern and the impacts for the ground and drinking water resources. As we know that all land uses present threats to groundwater resources, but commercial and industrial uses present additional threats. And as we know, all of Long Island is a sole source aquifer, meaning we're getting all of our drinking water from the groundwater below us. This is also a special groundwater protection area in part, and part of the groundwater here moves towards 3 Mile Harbor and other parts go to Hook Pond. So we want to make sure that all the land uses, we do as much mitigation as we can for these uses that have potentially additional concerns to and impacts to the groundwater. One of the largest land uses in the area is an active sand mine, which despite its vast size, the town has very little oversight. The licensing and permitting is with the New York State Department of State. So next slide. There's been a lot of working back and forth with the state, with our county legislature and state legislator, Fred Thiel, about getting the permission for the town to do monitoring of the groundwater around landfills and mulching sites. That didn't get signed by the governor last year, but there has been an announcement of a new 3-year study that New York State is embarking upon to evaluate the potential impacts of mining on groundwater resources. And it will include monitoring of sites in Brookhaven, Southampton, Riverhead, and in East Hampton. The town is going to be participating in this study as a stakeholder and helping to get concerns into the study. The baseline testing will begin in the fall of this year, most likely. Next slide, please. And another avenue that the public and the town officials have is to work with the property owners and the business owner. As we know, the landowner of the mine here is a longtime member of the community. And when I spoke to the DEC about the site, they said, we've got absolutely no complaints from the public about this mine. It all operates very well. And we can really talk with the DEC if we have any concerns. We could talk with the landowner themselves. They've been active participants in the Hamlet study plans and in this Springs Fireplace Road study as well. Next slide, please. Suffolk County and New York State now have some of the most stringent regulations in the country regarding the registry, storage, and the handling of toxic and hazardous materials. And they're in Suffolk County in Articles 7, 12, and 18. it's very hard to read this, but some of the businesses in East Hampton don't meet the minimum threshold to be regulated under these articles. And that would be sites with less than 250 gallons in portable containers or less than 2,000 pounds of bulk storage materials. So the planning department, together with the planning board, have adopted and developed a set of standards based on the county standards called the Planning Board Groundwater Protection Policy. So these are being implemented now and looked at whenever there's any commercial industrial site plan that comes in. What we're recommending is you consider putting these right into the code, codifying them to be sure that all applicants are aware of these restrictions and that the requirements are followed. Next slide, please. Another large land use and major potential threat to the groundwater is the town former landfill. Since 1997, the town has retained FPM Group to conduct quarterly monitoring of the groundwater and methane within and surrounding the landfill. I'm not going to review the findings now. The FPM goes over them with the town board at regular intervals, but the recommendation would be to continue this monitoring and adhering to any mitigating measures that are recommended. Next slide. And there's also another study underway, which we would recommend, and the town is continuing to coordinate and support it. This is the Suffolk County Private Well Testing Program. The yellow area is the boundary of the testing program that Suffolk County has embarked upon. There are 515 private wells identified in the area, and so far they've tested 223, a lot of out of the 515. So you see they're really only halfway there. There were some delays due to COVID, and the county is really reinvigorating the program now. They're trying to get everybody who's in it to participate. There had been advertisements sent out. They might even go door to door to get the homeowners to agree to have their well tested. So I'm not going to go over the preliminary results that we have now. The town is continuing to coordinate this with the Natural Resources Department and the town board. Here's periodically what the results are, but obviously this study would be coordinating with what the recommendations of that study should be. Next slide, please. Then there are new potential uses that could go into this area that we ought to think about and see whether, examine whether maybe particular uses should be prohibited. The planning department is looking at and will continue to look at what uses are allowed in the CI zone in the past and look and see not just for environmental concerns, but also now we have traffic concerns. So what would be the heavy traffic generators, and either put some special conditions on them or actually identify them as uses that shouldn't be allowed in this area altogether. And look at the boundaries of what is zoned for commercial industrial and see if there could be some adjustment made there. Next slide, please. And finally, there are best management practices that can be adopted for all uses handling and storing hazardous and toxic waste. And here are just some examples that we could be putting forward that, in these various categories in terms of procurement. Each business owner could be advised to minimize the toxic stored at any one time, to really take a look at their practices and maybe change the materials or the processes that they're using to reduce the need for toxics. In terms of storage, to store them in a storm-resistant structures, protect the containers from precipitation, stormwater, surface water, and groundwater, to keep the containers in good condition and to check for leaks on a regular basis and to label them. Some of these are just really good housekeeping practices. All of these would be incorporated into the town regulations and the county regulations, but these are just kind of additional best management practices, good housekeeping that everybody who's handling toxic and hazardous waste should be advised of. In terms of handling, prevent the spills by using additional containers. Sorry, there's a typo there. It's not suing additional containers, trays or drip pans, having material safety data sheets. In terms of disposal, labeling all the empty containers, disposing of empty containers as soon as possible in accordance with the federal, state, and county and local laws. emergency response control the source of the spill, contain the spill, notify the workers in the area, evacuate if necessary. Next slide, please. There was also a recommendation made that there be a town registry for businesses and what they're storing. And currently there are 2 registries that are in effect. The town fire marshal's office regulates and has an annual operating permit for ignitable, corrosive, toxic, and reactive substances. So we figure it's really best to work with the systems that we already have rather than create a new level of bureaucracy. So here's just an excerpt of that permit. But maybe to add to that would to get the copies through FOIL requests of what the Suffolk County Health Department Services Article 7, 12, and 18 permits and records are, and incorporate this into the town records. And the Natural Resources Director, Kim Shaw, has already done that, put forward a FOIL record. So we could then work with both of these systems to really develop, update, and augment the town database for the location, the storage, the use, the handling of toxic and hazardous materials from existing land uses right now. Okay, Peter will now discuss other mitigating measures to address the concerns for landscaping and visual concerns and traffic impacts.
Right, so we started by looking at what's what the roadside screening and landscaping is like today. As you know, there's a lot of vegetation, and it's kind of hard to see into many of the sites along Springs Fireplace Road. What we did is an inventory. At the top is sort of the southern half of the industrial commercial district, and at the bottom is the northern half. And then the different colors represent different extents and types of screening. So the green is basically the best kind of screening, which is maintaining sort of fairly wide sort of forested areas. That's sort of primarily in the northern part where there's existing woods and forest along the road. The only places that are totally unscreened, which you see in red, are several of the lots that are primarily used for automobile-related uses that have sort of open parking lots with cars in them. Otherwise, there's a fair amount of screening. The blue represents hedges, either tall or short hedges, but primarily fairly tall hedges that block the views. The brown represents tall or short but solid fences. And then the yellow represent areas that are landscaped but still open to the view. So probably more than 2/3 of the site has fairly good screening. Most of the rest of it is fairly well landscaped. So what we're looking at going forward is how can we sort of build on what we see as the best forms, which is probably this, to bring everybody up to a level where any kind of unfavorable view is blocked by either a solid and continuous hedge or a solid and continuous and fairly tall wood fence or some kind of material. So we're really looking at this as a model of you have a nicely landscaped street edge planted with trees, and then behind that, between that and the sort of private uses, you have a solid opaque barrier. Some of the other things that we're looking at in terms of mitigating the potential traffic impacts then really have to do with potential zoning or other regulations. So we've talked about the physical improvements to the roads and intersections. In terms of zoning modifications, there's only so many things you can do. You can change the density to reduce the overall potential for building. You can change the type of use or encourage uses that don't generate so much traffic. You can diversify the uses, as was sort of shown by the conceptual plan and the Hamlet studies. So instead of having all one kind of use that's all emerging at one time of day, you have different uses, residential, even perhaps, as well as commercial and industrial of different types, so that the traffic is generated for different purposes and therefore it can be better managed. And then the other thing is to require more enhanced traffic mitigation through the permitting provisions, so that you control the timing, so that people agree not to send out traffic at the peak hour. You have people who agree, if they have a heavy traffic use, to use carpooling or shuttle from a remote parking lot. And then a lot of the other things that we talked about during the Hamlet plan have to do with taking more of a master plan approach to redevelopment of the entire area. So instead of everybody having an individual lot with their own parking and their own access onto the main road, you connect the lots across the rear with either public or private roads. You encourage shared parking, and then you close off some of the curb cuts along the street and improve the pedestrian connections. And that, of course, improves both the functional usefulness of the whole district, but also the appearance by closing off some of those access points. And then there are a number of sort of policy-related improvements that could be done, such as managing those uses that you might have some control over, like the times of that the town recycling center is open, changing other town-related uses, like the senior center has already been relocated, probably for other reasons, but you do have control over that, or actually acquiring property to, for open space or other purposes that could reduce the generation of traffic. So all of those are things that we might consider going forward. This is the last slide. So the next steps, basically what we want to do is bring these ideas back to the business owners and the landowners in the study area at one meeting, and then have another public meeting to bring them back to members of the community, residents of the neighborhood, and sort of talk about which of these approaches, whether it's physical improvements or zoning or other changes, might be the best fit with their plans. And then we'll be incorporating all this information that we just presented into a final report, and then potentially talking to county officials about road improvements, working with you to figure out how do we instigate plans for these intersection improvements. And then parallel with that, we can begin implementation of the sort of environmental and other mitigation recommendations that Lisa talked about. Is there anything else you want to mention, Lisa?
No, I think that's good.
All right. Well, that is our presentation.
Thank you, Peter. Questions for the group here today? That's a very extensive analysis of the corridor study and update. I know there's a tremendous amount of work that's been put into this, and I know, Kathy, you've been intimately involved with this study as well, being the Springs liaison, and put in a great deal of work. Obviously, to me, and I think many others, we saw with the Hamlet studies that this area in particular requires a much more careful look by the town and by the community to shape its future potential development and what the impacts of any development might be. So again, I thank you. Are there any questions from board members at this point?
Well, the only thoughts I had on a couple thoughts. One is I just want to make sure that the multi-user as far as bicycle lanes and any type of redevelopment of intersections is always thought of. I think we talk about a lot of the traffic, and I appreciate you. I had a tough time understanding what all traffic notations were out there, Ray, but you explained it to me. I thank you. I didn't know what the acronyms were, but I got them. But I just want to make sure that we continuously look at about bike corridors and how that whole area can actually still make sure we have widths that are safe and available for that. And also about the multi-access points, Washington Ave is a little bit like that also, in which it's a side street off. Yes, some lots do front on to the major corridor, but there is about 5 or 6 parcels back there that do take access off of 2 access points and shared access points instead of 5 or 6 separate ones then too. So that seems to be a place where it does work a little bit. But that's just my quick thoughts, and I look forward to Kathy. I know you brought this forward, and I look forward to seeing what the public thinks as we continue to move forward in the next steps. That's very important. Thank you, Kathy, for shepherding it.
I do want to thank Kathy for doing this. This is like the deep dive after we did the deep dive into the Hamlet studies. So, and keeping the same team together, I think was really helpful with Peter Flinker and Lisa and Ray. I just need to study it. I'm a little concerned about the roundabout. It's Springs, Fireplace, and 3 Mile Harbor. The western side that had the 2 lanes in it, if there was another way to I just don't want it to get too traffic heavy there. It is a residential area. It's a transitional area, I think, more than anything else into residential. So I just want to make sure it's also pedestrian friendly. So I'd like to take a look into that again. But, well done and presentation and concise. And thank you so much for it. And I look forward to hearing community comments as well.
Anyone else? I thank you all for the presentation. Kathy, go ahead.
So, we're, as Ray started off, we're wrapping up the $7.6 million reconstruction of Springs Fireplace Road. There will be bike lanes, but only from Abraham's Path north to Woodbine, to David's point, because the road just wasn't wide enough to do it through the more commercial area south of Abraham's Path. The intersection, Sylvia, that you bring up, the Springs Fireplace, 3 Mile Harbor, North Main Street exit intersection, I guess I wasn't too surprised when I got to preview this presentation last week to see that it's already an F. Particularly, during the morning, you see the cars backed up. That's a difficult left to make, and it's not, the visibility isn't great.
Yeah.
Those of us in Springs, find workarounds sometimes because we don't want to be, stuck in that long line of traffic. And there's a lot of, industrial, type vehicles that are mixed in, and school buses and whatnot. So, as David said, and you did too, Sylvia, we need to hear from the community on this. That's why we're going to be setting up the meetings in July. We haven't set a date yet. I think first like to get some preliminary comments back from people. We sent this presentation out to all of the folks that attended the Springs Corridor, kickoff meeting back in February of 2020, or at least all of those that we had email addresses for. So they've got the presentation, although, the traffic part is complicated without Ray explaining it. But that's the good news. We've got video on that, so people can go and take a look at the video to review what was discussed. And I hope community members will forward their comments and thoughts on what we've presented so far so we can move forward.
I have a quick question, if I can direct it to Ray. And it's a bit out of left field, but is there, I remember, in the 60s when I was really young and we were building a lot of highways, there's big highway extensions, and they found out that sort of paradoxically building bigger, wider roads didn't fix the traffic. It actually attracted more traffic. Is there that possibility that may be kind of a paradoxical effect if we do things to improve the flow of traffic? Do you think that's a legitimate possibility?
That's a possibility, and sometimes in like a major highway project where you're considering an alternate widening of one highway that complements the other one by taking traffic in the morning rush hour, that you're going to attract traffic once you fix it or improve it. You're going to attract traffic from the other roadway that you didn't think you were going to have. But we're not improving the capacity that much. We just, even with the future development, we're getting by with level service D, which is not, it's not like you really want to go through that. It's better than the F, it's better than the long backups, but it's, I don't think it's a major consideration here.
Okay.
One of the negative impacts of having those major intersections and roadways fail is that people find alternative routes, and now we get complaints of residential neighborhoods and what have become cut-through streets to alleviate those traffic concerns. So I think unless we can improve the flow at some of our major intersections, the traffic's already here, and it's just going to continue to degrade the quieter residential neighborhoods as spillover. So, I think to Jeff's point, though, we do only have a single highway coming across the canal, or I guess there is Old 27 as well, but it's pretty narrow and limited access to get here. But once everyone's here, it's not so much increasing traffic as trying to alleviate some delays. And to David's point, any way that we can make bicycling and other alternative means of transportation improved means that we will also reduce vehicle trips. We're not going to be building new roadways here, and we're not likely to be widening them and adding lanes. There just simply isn't the room.
Yeah, Peter, and one other thing too, the Suffolk County Planning is currently conducting a bus study of the entire bus system. I don't know if you're aware, but they're looking to have that finalized by the end of the year. So I think they're coming out for public comment very soon. We don't know specifically what they have planned for the routes in East Hampton in the area, but they are in the process of doing that.
Thank you, Ray. Any other questions for the group here today? I thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing the conversation on this very important topic in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, right. Michael, do we have callers on the line?
Yes, we do have one caller. I can bring that caller in.
Stay on the line just in case the question that comes up is relating to the presentation.
The caller's phone ends in 8764. I'll unmute that now.
No, this is Dave Buda, and it does not relate to the prior conversation, which I appreciated, but I don't have a comment on it today. But rather, I'd like to offer a quick comment of great concern to me concerning your upcoming public hearings this Thursday on the Community Preservation Fund land acquisition. First, you're going to consider proposing the addition of certain property located on Broadview Road within the Bell Estate in Amagansett to be added to the Preservation Fund's project plan. I personally found that property does not, based on what I know today, based on what information I've been able to collect, that the property does not warrant being added to that plan. But if you find that property is necessary to be acquired to preserve community character, you're then going to consider whether to acquire it in a $9.3 million transaction, with the town's cost to be reduced by a $3 million contribution from the neighboring property owners, who are in reality the only true beneficiaries of the proposed transaction. And I even understand they proposed and advocated for the acquisition. I believe that this CPF land acquisition, when you balance what you would be acquiring and what it would cost, would be the town's single most expensive and most inefficient use of CPF funds, and objectively is unnecessary from an environmental perspective when you weigh the cost against the amount of actual land that would be preserved that is not already preserved. You know that the project plan is a requirement of the CPF law. It's required to be updated every 5 years. It's designed to be a comprehensive, objective, professional planning and environmental review of the available lands that you feel that the planners and environmental consultants feel are warranted to be possibly acquired if available, so as to preserve community character. The fact that you have not honored the requirements of the law and not updated it as required every 5 years, you and your predecessors, means that you're flying by the seat of your pants, and that's not the way to fly. What I would like to do is remind you that on June 3rd and 4th, I submitted a FOIL request for certain things. The most important thing I would like to request, and I would suggest that you make a mandatory inclusion in any future considerations of adding properties to the project plan, is I understand from Mr. Wilson that the planning department is called upon in every review of property to prepare a 3 to 4 page assessment of that property. Now, that would not consider or take into consideration value. That would not take into consideration availability or likelihood of being able to purchase. It would be an objective planning and environmental review. That assessment is a public document. That assessment should be made available to the public prior to you having a public hearing, or it's part of the process of scheduling a public hearing, and I have requested it, but I have not received it. I have not even received a response to my June 3rd and June 4th FOIL request, other than to receive copies of certain minutes of the CPF Advisory Board, which of course were not the executive sessions, and therefore they were totally irrelevant. I really think that the There's a lot to be said and learned about this particular proposal and the existing conditions and the existing restrictions and the existing conservation easements and scenic easements and the realities of the ownership of the various properties and the development of the Bell Estate and how much of that property was preserved through the careful consideration of the planning boards in the 1980s when this was done. I really think that there's a lot more information that the board needs to have in front of it, and you should not, under any circumstances, keep from the public an objective professional assessment of the property, which apparently is part of your process and was done, and I've requested, but I haven't received. So I would request it again today so that we can have a more meaningful conversation on Thursday. So that's my request for today, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, David. And, I do appreciate your opinions and your comments. This property has been reviewed, as all properties are prior to acquisition. And the document that you referred to, I believe, does exist and is part of our normal process to have the planning department review prior to acquisition. And that's been made available to town board members. There often is a sensitivity in seeking to acquire a property, and as you state, perhaps it is the correct time once a property is becomes under contract and is preparing for a public hearing for that document to be made available. So we will follow up with your FOIL request with town attorney's office and have that discussion.
I appreciate it, because really at this point, I mean, there's a lot of things that probably have gone on that should be part of a transparent, open process, and I don't think you object to that. But simply to have the Director of Land Acquisition stand up and recite literally 2 sentences, as it appears in the resolution, as the explanation for why a particular property should be acquired as necessary to preserve community character, it's insufficient, especially since the work has been done, the assessment has been done. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the cost. It's not a document that should be protected from public view. If you are scheduling a hearing, it's obviously germane. I've requested it, and I appreciate that you will expedite the production of that information, as well as the other information I've requested, which has to do with other matters concerning the property. But I'll leave that to you and your town attorney to deal with. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate that, David. And, the scheduling of the public hearing is a resolution that's done. But I would say that our focus obviously is the public hearing itself, where there is, full, transparency and discussion with the public as to what's being proposed in terms of an acquisition. And, that is the appropriate time to be hearing from the public. And that's why we schedule those public hearings. And again, I will follow up with council.
I appreciate, but as you can imagine, that when a public hearing is scheduled, and this one would have happened 2 weeks ago if it weren't for the failure to add the property to the project plan, the public has very little time to even learn about, certainly to investigate, certainly to acquire information. It's a very expedited process, and there's really no reason for that. These are significant, expensive transactions of great significance to the public and to the neighborhoods, and you should give the public more opportunity to understand them and to evaluate them, and therefore perhaps to comment on them. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to see that document disclosed. I think he makes a good point. I think it should be disclosed promptly.
Thank you. Do we have any other callers on the line?
No, we do not.
All right. In that case, we'll move on to the liaison report.
And thank you, Lisa, Peter, and Ray, for joining us today. Okay, so
nice to see you. We'll jump off then. Right?
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Start with human services. So from January 1st through yesterday, we've delivered close to 30,000 meals. That's the good news. We do need, though, to do a budget modification because the senior nutrition line, we've run out of funds. So because the Montauk nutrition program has been closed and we've been delivering frozen meals to those folks in Montauk that would like the meals, What we're going to do is move $60,000 from the Montauk Nutrition Program to the food line in the Senior Nutrition Program, and that resolution is going to be on for Thursday. Jeannie mentioned that we're going to be going out for RFP for architectural and engineering services for the new senior center. That's something, a document that I've been working on with Diane Patrizio, Director of Human Services, and Jeannie Carrozza. It's going to be routed to the Senior Building Committee, and when it's a little bit tighter, I'll route it to the town board. We also need to put together a selection committee, and I'll send folks, the board, an email on, who we believe should be included on that committee. Switching gears to special events, I have a resolution on today to approve the Clamshell Foundation's fireworks. That is scheduled for Saturday, July 17th. At 9:30, there's a rain date of Sunday, July 18th. It's their 39th annual fireworks show, and they anticipate about 5,000 people, viewing the fireworks. But, that's obviously a guesstimate. I'm also going to have a resolution on for Thursday for other special events. And I wanted to just note that the East Hampton Aviation Association is looking to do their Just Plane Fun Day. Once again, that's something that they've been doing for the last couple of years out at the airport, where they display modern and vintage aircraft. They're looking to do their event on Saturday, 9/11, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. They're expecting 2,000 people, 600 cars on the property, but they really got that down to a science over there as far as managing, and it's the folks that attend, will be very spread out. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention was that the Spring CAC is going to be meeting next Tuesday, June 22nd at 6 p.m. via Zoom. And if anybody is interested in the community that's not on the committee that wants to attend, they can reach out to either myself or Lauren Bolger for the link. And that's what I have for today.
Thank you, Kathy. David?
Yes, thank you very much. Just quickly about the Clamshell Foundation. I want to thank the committee for looking at that, and also I just want to, in the memory of Rossetti Perchek. Rossetti Perchek was a great man of Springs that actually resurrected, the Great Bonnet Fireworks and the Clamshell Foundation. He was part of, I believe, of the ARB and others also, and this is a legacy of him then too. So it's nice to see that happening again this year. And Rossetti was just a good friend of mine, so I just want to throw that out there for Rossetti. I know he's looking over us. Okay, the Nature Preserve Committee met last week. They actually did a field trip to a couple locations. They visited the Bennett Cemetery, in which Herb Loper was restoring for us. And did a great job cleaning up, and is now looking really good. He's also doing some work pro bono over at the Amagansett East End Cemetery. They also traveled up to some of the other trailheads and areas up in the Northwest Woods to look at, specifically, they went to the Van Scoy Cemetery and Homestead to look at barberry and discuss different ways for barberry removal. This had been done by the Trail Society about 10 years ago, and they're interested in keeping the invasive barberry out of there, looking for different ways to do so. And they're going to discuss this further. They looked at also Chatsfield Hole, which is on 2 holes of water. And they're discussing, since Chatsfield Hole was one of the first nature preserves in the town of East Hampton, there's a lot of water that is actually now road runoff that has been collecting in Chatsfield Hole, and also sending a lot of material in there. So they're interested in potentially looking at this as maybe a water quality project also upcoming then to how to work and keep the road runoff out of Chatsfield Hole and also potentially restore Chatsfield Hole, and that's going to continue to be discussed. Let's see here. They're to continue to work on the trailheads, which we're doing at the Montauk Recycling Center. The maintenance report is that the trail stewards are continue their monitoring trails maintenance. They repaired some of the Soak Heights boardwalks over the bridge that's there. They did some they added additional stepping stones, pond, trail, boardwalks, and minor encroachment violations. So they're still continuing on with that. Moving on to the next one. Let me see here. It's in aquaculture. Aquaculture department has done spawning clams and oysters right now, and they're moving them to nursery. They had a great turnout of those. They're also in the process right now of spawning scallops, and they'll be transporting them also to the nursery very shortly. We hope for a low die-off within the transport process and for them to grow and mature very shortly. Oyster gardening program is also going very well with over 100 participants, and at the new Montauk locations, there's about a dozen out there right now in a very tranquil location. So if anyone's interested in the community oyster gardening program, please contact John Dunn at Aquaculture in the Aquaculture Department. Recreation, we're still accepting applications for summer positions, and that would be recreational park aides. Also, their program has open registration. The rec department has programs open for registration on the town's website that would include sailing and other nice summer options that are outside. Please look into those or contact the recreational department at 324-4141. We had a meeting with the chief of the East Hampton Town Lifeguard, John Ryan, also John Rooney, department head, and Ed Michaels. Excuse me, not Ed Michaels. He wasn't there. To discuss temporary lifeguards at Ditch Plains Beach, because right now it's an unguarded area and it's an area that gets used a lot. So we have come up with a potential temporary solution that I'm looking for town board assistance or guidance or questions on about moving the guarded beach to the west, which is a closer area to poles. There's a sandy area where we can actually have a lifeguard stand there. It could be set into the sand and safe so it wouldn't fall over. So that's one option we have. The other option is to put some sand on the beach. We need about 20 yards to set the lifeguard stand, and that would be closer to Otis Road. Staying off the hard pan right now, but in those are the two areas that we would actually be looking at. This is what was requested by the Montauk CAC. I know we were looking at it also recently. What I'm going to do is just pull up those two locations so that the board could see this. I'm having a little trouble screen sharing, but try my best right here. These are the two locations. So right now in this area where my cursor is going all over is all hard pan. Again, this is from a while back, this beach profile. But to put a stand in this location, which still would be in conformance with our Suffolk County permit, but also to get some sand in this area to put another location here. If we can't access this because of the hard pan, because of the need of mechanical machinery, at least to have one move to the west that would give us a guarded area that we can have there. The concerns are along this area with rips coming out of this groin here. So with that being discussed, does the board have any discussion points on temporary adjusting the lifeguard stands at Ditch and trying to get it to be a guarded beach for the weekend?
David, I know in my discussions with John Ryan Jr. and John Rooney ahead of the Memorial Day weekend, which ended up being a washout, so it wasn't an issue. We talked about the fact that we couldn't physically set stands in that location because there was no sand to bury them in. So what you're proposing would be something we discussed that is a short-term solution. But I will be speaking in my liaison report later about having a beach replenishment at that location. So just for the immediate addressing of that issue, we could place, a minimum amount of sand to hold the stand, and perhaps it'd be best to keep the stand closest to where we might expect rips to develop so that guards can respond more quickly to where you might have problems with swimmers getting in trouble.
Thank you.
That would be my recommendation, but it's not hard and fast, and I think if John Rooney and John Ryan Jr. feel that either of those locations is suitable, then so be it.
So, David, my concerns would be whether or not there's a conflict in either location with surfers versus swimmers. to have John Ryan take a look at that. He would be the one I think I would depend on. I know this came up in the business recovery meeting last week, so I'm anxious to hear what the supervisor has to say about it as well. And there is concern about having lifeguards at Ditch Plain. So, I think I appreciate you working towards getting that to happen.
Okay.
Have we gotten any input from, I know John is with the swimmers, but from surfers, is there a way to get some input there?
Poles is a pretty traditional use for surfing. I think there actually might be even a surf camp down there. But I think even prior to that, there's also the public safety aspect of it right now that we have. We find a guarded beach down there that we can do safely. And I'll check in with John Ryan about that, and I'll circle back. But again, when I get that email off to everyone, because there is aspects of this that have to be done immediately to get in place for Saturday, where we go full time on all our lifeguard stands. Just make sure we respond to me, and I'll keep moving it forward based on the.
Yeah, I think we should try to get a stand up, and I would defer honestly to the professionals who are there and have observed and deal with life saving as to what the best locale would be.
Well, I just want to make sure I understood. Were you suggesting, Peter, that you thought that it was possible that one lifeguard stand would be sufficient? That's what I thought I heard you say. Was I incorrect?
Isn't that what was recommended? One stand, and that it be placed at one of those two locations.
Okay.
The way I understood that. Is that correct, David? Or
they're looking for two stands. There's typically always two stands at the location.
At those locations, I would absolutely support going forward with making sure that happens as soon as possible.
Okay.
But the stand further to the east, you said you need to bring sand in for.
We will. So that's what I need to find out from the board.
Basically, a dump truck load of sand, which will anchor the stand alone. It doesn't. We're not talking about waiting for a whole beach replenishment.
No, that's correct. No, it's 20 or 30 yards to anchor the stand. And we'll probably use a bay lifeguard stand there, which is shorter. It's so that it's less of a jump if any of the lifeguards have to come off, or as sometimes people go on there at nighttime, so there's no danger there. But those two locations typically will have a 50-yard guarded area in front of it. It will give us at least those two 50-yard guarded areas in that beach, and it will have a lifeguarded presence down there the best way that we can based on the based on the beach conditions right now. Then too, and I personally think it's appropriate to try to move forward, but I just want to make sure the board is comfortable with those, knowing that there is some temporary changes there.
Can I just understand maybe bigger picture? So we put the 20 yards of sand down there, and we open a stand and poles. Beginning Saturday, we're now 7 days a week, aren't we? With lifeguards?
We are.
And then, Peter, I know you were waiting for your liaison report, but it's kind of helpful to be able to talk about this in bigger picture. Do you have news that we're going to be able to do?
Maybe what we'll do is I'll go through just finish off this liaison report, and then I'll let Peter talk, and then we'll chime back into it. If that's okay, and I'll come back into it. I didn't want to stop. Let me just keep moving forward on this, Kathy. If you don't mind, we'll keep answering the questions after Peter's report. I want to let everyone know the Westlake Comfort Station engineering proposal. I'm going to have it on for resolution for this Thursday for acceptance of the engineering proposal. This is from LK McLean, and this will start the Westlake Comfort Station reconstruction. Also, I will be noticing for a public hearing this Thursday for a public hearing for July 1st for the Acaponic Road weight limits. We'll be moving that forward. I want to let the board know at Second House, we have the POs being drafted right now, purchase orders prepared for the installation of drainage there. So the drainage and then the grading aspects will be working there to try to get that outside of that location a little bit more buttoned up. I want to also thank the Montauk Skate Park Coalition. I know, Kathy, you came to some of the outings, and I know, Peter, you chimed into some of the leaders of the coalition also. I want you to thank you for that. They put on a great
event. Over there, too.
I didn't see you, but thank you very much.
I went by to visit. It was a lot of fun community day.
It was a great event. Yes, it was. There was close. The weather helped. It kept everyone a little bit tighter there, which was nice. Meaning that they didn't go to the beach overall. There was hundreds of kids that came by and just sort of congregated to hear the news. And at nighttime, they actually had an auction in which they raised a significant amount of money for the Montauk Skate Park Coalition and the restoration. Some of the kids from the Montauk School participated. And if you look behind my shoulder,
That's what I was going to ask.
there was one that I was lucky to win also.
Oh, great.
So it was a great day of outreach to the community, and it was nice to be involved. And I thank you for all who participated in that. Tomorrow, I also want to let everyone know the Chamber of Commerce has known this. Peter, you might mention this. There's a vaccine clinic at the Montauk Playhouse tomorrow between 4 and 8. It is a walk-up vaccine clinic. And this is the Montauk Playhouse, and they'll be offering Johnson & Johnson. Flyers have gone out to the Chamber of Commerce, both in English and Spanish. Last week's vaccine clinic, what we saw, I know Peter was talking with the hospital, there was we had about 20 people that were looking for first doses that they couldn't accommodate. So we felt it's appropriate to continue our vaccine clinics. Let me see. Lastly, one of my dearest friends, the groom in my wedding, his name was Willie Stedman. His father was on the Windblown and was lost at sea in 1984. And recently, a lot of information has come up about that, some of it not all being what Willie really agrees with. And I don't agree with it either. But the reason I say that is every year I contact Jason Walters, who's a grounds coordinator for the Montauk Lighthouse. And on that location back in 1999, there was the placement of the Lost at Sea Memorial. It was designed by Malcolm Frazier, and which honors individuals that worked in our community that were lost at sea over the last couple of hundreds of years then too. And Mike Stedman's name and the rest of his deckmates on the Windblown are on that memorial. And I thank Mary for helping out with that. I want to make sure that the town board knows that it is our responsibility to do as needed fix-ups to that memorial, and there might be some of that coming in years in the future. But it's a great memorial at a great site on a great township in a great country. Everyone a lot of times just goes to the lighthouse, but please also go and look and touch and feel the Lost at Sea Memorial. It's extremely appropriate design and one of the best locations in the world. And I just want to let the people know that from some of my personal reference. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, David. Sylvia, you have a report for us?
Yeah, the Business Recovery Group met, and we have Robert Ross on the call every week. Southampton Hospital is down to 1 COVID patient. Eastern Long Island has none, and Stony Brook is down to 21 patients. So that's quite a dip, as we're seeing week to week going down, and especially at Stony Brook, which is good news for all of us. And these numbers are from last Wednesday, so they could be different coming up tomorrow when we have our meeting. We discussed Bill 807733 that's in the Assembly. I haven't tracked it to see if it passed in the Senate. This would allow alcohol services on municipal and state property, which would be in the right-of-way for 27. It would alleviate the need for an emergency exec order as we had last summer. So, or any other way to have that happen. So Fred Theo is the one that is helping us with it, and I'll give him a call again this week to see where we are. Kevin Cooper is the new head of code enforcement. It's coming to our meeting tomorrow and talking to the Business Recovery Group. Businessmen, as you know, made up of different businessmen from all across the town and in different types of businesses that we've been working with. There was concerns in Montauk about walking paths to the beach from Kirk parking lot. David, I sent you an email about that. Maybe working to get the barriers. They seem to be taking the barriers down, and as you walk over, if you're parking at Kirk Park, parking lot, then walking over to the beach, they're taking the split rail fences almost down to where they're not supposed to, walk over the dunes in that area. So would love to see if we can get something maybe a little more permanent or easy, or not so easy to maneuver.
Yeah, I think it's going to take snow fencing to deter people from that.
Maybe we could plant an indigenous variety of the prickly pear cactus on that plant section, because that is
Rosa rugosa does it for me. I mean,
that is a native part of its habitat.
Oh, maybe that. So I'll look for a combination. But yes, Sylvia, I got that, and I'll work on that.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Also, there was concern that sand was needed after the Memorial Day storms in the downtown area, and also sent emails out regarding that. There was a brief discussion on the number of ambulance calls that have already taken place. And there seems to be, particularly in Montauk, there seems to be an increase already this summer, early on in the summer. And Southampton Hospital chimed in and said that they really hope the emergency facility is moving forward. It is sorely needed, as the volunteers that are EMS and EMTs won't have, they have to take time off as employees to be able to man the ambulances. It takes more than two, up to three folks to man an ambulance when a volunteer call comes out. They have one paid EMT and the rest are all volunteers. They had over the Memorial Day weekend 18 calls, and then over this past weekend they had 10. And so, having that emergency center closer to the people that need emergency care is going to be very helpful to us. To the business community. The Anti-Bias Task Force also met. They had discussions on some of the updates that they were working on, projects like the diversity show and the updated brochure in both Spanish and English. There was also a discussion about the Little Farmhouse, which is the migrant house in Wainscott Hollow Road. They are also hoping to save it as part of the early 1900s farm life for Black workers and migrant workers in Wainscott. The Community Housing Opportunity Fund Committee also met. We just got an email from Tom Rule that said the 0.5% transfer tax legislation passed both the Assembly and the Senate. So that would be, we're waiting to see if the governor signs it before it can be something that we can use as a referendum in the town for a transfer tax to help solve some affordable housing issues. We had a discussion, and I may need Jill Nicky's help with this as we move forward with it. There had been some affordable apartments that had been built. If you recall, there are 20 affordable units can be built in residential areas in every hamlet. So that's up to 100 units. So we've had a couple of them that have either been abandoned or the houses have been sold and they're not being used as affordable apartments anymore. So we need to, and we didn't address that in our earlier legislation. So John, we may need to come back and start talking about how to address abandoned or not things that aren't being used as affordable apartments that were that were put in. The group is also recommending that we put $2 million in, and this was Kathy Burke-Gonzalez's recommendation, contribution as we were talking about funding for the town, affordable housing projects, and recommending that $2 million be paid into next year's budget for affordable housing. This was done, I believe, in the 2018 budget, where we put $2 million in. So hopefully that is something that we can consider as we come up to budget season in August. The small group for the Energy Sustainability Committee met. You heard today Jeannie Carosa talking about an RFP for the Green Heating and Cooling Program that we'd like to move forward, which was like the Energize East Hampton program for solar. We'd also, you'll be getting a letter that the group is recommending that for the town, just as we had an efficiency vehicle policy, that we have a policy where any HVAC that's being replaced within town buildings that we consider, or our first choice would be green heating and cooling options, which are cooling only with air source heat pumps, which are usually all electric heat pumps. We're going to ask Lauren to present a letter and consideration about an RFP for consultants that will provide a roadmap that we get to 100% renewable. And that will be later on in July. Also on July 13th, we're going to have a meeting with street lighting conversion in the town of East Hampton to all LED. That work session, as I said, is July 13th. We're going to try to partner, and Sag Harbor is reaching out to us to partner with them. It will be for better efficiency as we move towards changing our street lights into LEDs. On the 17th, coming up in 2 days, we're having the public hearing on the New York stretch code. And so we hope builders weigh in. We also worked with Roy Daleen, a builder for Telemark, an owner of Telemark, weighed in on the stretch code. And so we're hopeful that we get a lot of comments on Thursday night. Wainscott CAC also sent a letter to everyone asking for a citizens committee to be formed about airport issues. And we hope that that would be forthcoming. The tree committee from the Wainscott CAC is also meeting with a couple of new members from Main Street, which remains the most critical street at the moment to consider for trees. And I thank Steve Lynch for input and helping us kind of move that whole process forward. The Art Council also met. The Art Apart is on June 19th, coming up on Saturday. It's from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We have 30 artists that have already registered. So we're looking forward to getting the final map. It should be available. If you go to Google and just Google Art Apart 2021, the website will pop up. You'll be able to print out the map and then use that map as you go through to visit 30 or more locations for artists for a drive-by art show. And the map will be sent to the police department, Kathy. They had recommended, as we did last year, that the police understand where all the locations are. And where I'm working with the planning department on the use table updates. This is, we're having a meeting tomorrow, and this is probably our 4th meeting on updating the use tables. So for the zoning code. And hopefully would have something then in front of the town board to look at later on this summer as we go through the list. So that is all that I have for today.
Thank you, Sylvia. Jeff, do you have a liaison report for us today?
I do. The Airport Management Advisory Committee met, and we talked a little bit about traffic in 2021. The comparison, of course, to 2020 is not really very accurate given the drop in traffic. So Jim Brundage kind of focused on the difference between 2019 and 2021. And I believe his estimate was that it was up 14%, which is not huge, but it's a real increase. He attributed the increase to the increase in traffic, primarily jet traffic, from January to April, when people started doing what we believe to be reverse commuting into New York. So his prediction was that it was likely that summer would be a similar count and not, wouldn't dramatically increase. Although Arthur Malman mentioned that it depends on how many offices are opening in New York, and wondered if we would see some of that reverse commuting still continue on in the summer months, but it's pretty unclear. He did say that a lot of the traffic increase was because of East Hampton-based recreational pilots were flying a lot more. I know that anecdotally, that during COVID, there was a lot more, flying, small plane flying from the hobby pilots.
So Jeff, can I just ask you, just to be clear, when you say that the traffic is up 14%, are you talking about the period of July through September that we normally track the seasonal, or are you talking about annual? Because
I think he was talking year to date in comparing 2019 to 2021 total operations. I believe that's what he was comparing.
But I guess my question is, do we have the overall count of operations for 2020 versus 2019? Obviously,
for 2020 versus 2019, yes, we do. The total ops for 2020 were 4296, and the total operations for 2019 were 5190. So that was a drop, which you would expect. And then the total operations for 2021 year to date are 7592. That's a significant increase. Also, Arthur Malman, who's the chair, had some comments on the HRA economic study. He had some comments where he thought revisions might be worth looking at, and I've passed those along through Cooley to HR&A. As folks at home may know by now, these reports are preliminary, and we can and will update them or change them or look at them.
Do you mind sharing those with the rest of the board members?
I'd like to get some of those recommendations as well from the committee.
Yes, I can do that. It was a letter that Arthur sent out. I just immediately forwarded it on to get it to HRA. Yeah, I can send those around. Not a problem. One of them was they're kind of couple of them are somewhat minor. He was critical of a photo that showed a plane being de-iced, and because we don't de-ice in East Hampton, a valid point. He indicated that the study referred to helicopter routes from 2006, not the latest routes. And I think there is an error in the total number of operations at Montauk Airport. I think it was overstated, but I will circulate that letter. There were some comments from the public that they're not having an easy time finding documents in this re-envisioning process. So I'm going to reach out to IT to see if we can make it easier. It's kind of a little bit of a maze that you have to get through on the website to get into the documents. And I've talked to Heath about it, and he doesn't want to clutter up the home page by putting a button there, but I think maybe we could do something to make it a little easier. There were suggestions that we have better notice, additional forms of notice for our proposed July 6th work session. So we're going to work on a press release and an ad in the paper. I think it's a good idea. We can also use the AMAC list. We're expecting that the Community Alliance, that's the pro-airport group that put out the first economic study, will have a critique of the town study. I'm not sure when that's coming in, but when it does come in, we'll circulate it and get it to HR&A as well. Just trying to see if, another issue that came up, or a point that was raised that impacts affects the greenhouse gas calculation, is that many flights that come into East Hampton, for example, the big jets, do not remain in East Hampton. They deliver their passengers and leave and then come back. And it's difficult to know how many passengers are arriving because of what they call these deadhead flights that go out. Actually, Steve Tuma just wrote and said that he's going to try to use some communication that he uses to manage his ramp to get some more definitive information about the number of passengers coming in and leaving on airplanes. He uses something called a unicom to manage the ramp to do that, and said he'd try to keep an eye on it, which I think, might be helpful. There's an eagerness to see our air study, our greenhouse gas study, which has been circulated to the town board. And I'd like to get that posted as soon as possible. Kathy had asked that we put a resume of the expert that prepared it on, and I have that, and that can go out. And that's about it, I think, from the airport. And then I just wanted to add a couple of comments, if I may, on the Springs Park. I went out there on Sunday again. I'm out there a lot, actually. I've used it over the years a lot, and it's a terrific place. I know you've heard that from neighbors, but I wanted to just say that personally. And one of the things I think is really works very well is the design. It's got a very good design flow. It's got a 1 mile loop, and I was out Sunday just to sort of check on to see how what kind of shape the shortcuts are, what I would call the shortcuts. There are a number of pathways that you can take to get from the outer perimeter on the right to the outer perimeter on the left. And of course, that would lead you also to the center path, which is widely cleared. And they all seem to be in very good shape. There's a lot of access in that park. I don't see any problem, frankly, just based on my own personal observations about losing your dogs, not being able to find them. They can go out of sight for a while, but because of these paths that traverse the park, they're very easy to find and recover. And of course, because the fencing is intact, it's a good thing, because they can't really escape, and you eventually find them as you round the next bend. As far as I can see, in the years I've been using it, it's a workable plan. It's kind of evolved in a grassroots way, and it has a real flow. It's kind of fun to know you've walked a mile around the circuit, and it's certainly in the hearts of the public because of how usable it is and how beautiful it is. And there are a variety of different kinds of terrain in there. I do think it's a mistake to talk about bringing this park back to grassland. It never was grassland. When we bought it, it was a nursery. And it happens to be one of the most beautiful parks in East Hampton. It really is. So I don't want to see that change particularly. And I am a dog owner. I will confess that. But, and as I was looking at it, as I walked in, there is plenty of room in this park that isn't within that fenced area. And we could very easily, I think, break through, particularly as you're coming in off the roadway. It would be very easy to create an entryway into a completely separate area that could be a small dog park area without damaging the flow and the beauty of the shade and the rich vegetation of the park as it has evolved and remains. And I have to say again that how exciting it is and how relaxing it is to meander down these paths where every time you come out of a turn, it opens up into this different kind of view. And there are many different kinds of terrain there. There are fields there, there are meadows there, there are brambles there. It's just phenomenal as it is. And my position is emphatically, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if small dog owners want a small park, there is a way to do it without messing up the park. And I just want to add that this is not a critique of the people that served on the committee. I know several of them. But I do think we could have done a little bit better job of engaging the public and really hearing comment from the public before the recommendations got out. It would seem to me that if there was some concern about the park, it should come from the grassroots up. And then you'd have a committee that could make recommendations. But we are where we are. I'm not critical of the committee, but I am emphatically opposed to changing the basic layout of that park. But we can get something for small dogs, I think. So that's all I have, and I thank you.
Jeff, I happen to have a dog too, but unfortunately he's used the park when he was younger, but he's near the end of his life at this point. But I'm curious as to, since you're such a big user of the park, why you didn't volunteer to serve with me on the committee.
Why I didn't volunteer to be on the committee?
Yeah, to serve with me on the committee.
I'll be happy to go on the committee if you want me to be on the committee, frankly. It seemed to me the committee was formed kind of, without me knowing it. All of a sudden there was a committee. You brought it to the town board sort of as a done deal, frankly. It was a resolution. I agree.
Yeah,
I'll be happy to get on that committee if you want me.
When was that resolution? How many months ago? I think it was February.
That was February, and I brought it up in a number of work sessions. But,
Well, okay. If there's nothing else, I'd like to.
No, I have just a question. Community engagement. The other thing that came up at the AMAC meeting was about community engagement, and with Lisa and Peter, working on the project now, that will we have a schedule of how that's going to roll out for the airport? And can we present that at the July 6th meeting so that people have, lots of advance notice as to when future meetings will be and how the process is going to look and shape up? Because those are the kind of comments I'm getting from folks.
Yeah, I think I've talked to Lisa about that, and she said she would not have a problem coming up with a schedule of meetings. I mean, we ran into trouble on this meeting because the town board didn't approve that study that we were going to do. I mean, and I can't release a document unless I get the okay from the town board. And I had written you, 2 times, once in early May and once in late May.
The presentations we had today had been scheduled long in advance, and as you could see, a lot of work went into both of them. But
so was the airport scheduled long in advance. You know that.
Check for a moment, please, and just ask. I mean, we had another caller on the phone today asking about the diversion study. The board some time ago expressed an interest in the importance of conducting a diversion study. So if you, Jeff, as liaison, can give us an idea as to where that stands and when we'll actually be able to approve a resolution to go out for that diversion study.
I will get back to you on that. I know they've started, and I know it's HMMH. And from what I understand, it's not that difficult.
How did we select?
We can't.
Because they've been retained.
On that, we never even had the proposal.
They've been retained.
We need a scope of what they're going to do, because when we did the diversion study in 2015, the diversion study was based on the 4 local laws. I mean, you can't do a diversion study without having a premise of what you're studying. So we need to come to some agreement. Like, for instance, modified airport, we have to come to an agreement on, what modified airport is. How many options will they be studying in the diversion study?
I will get on that, and I've talked to Cooley about it, and have understood that they are able to do a diversion study. It's not, I don't want to underestimate it, but they said it's, it can readily be done, and I will have to get back to you because Cooley is kind of managing HMA on this issue.
Well, there is a scope of work that I think Kathy alluded to that we would need to review and approve before going out to have the study actually conducted. So that would be helpful. I know there's some very interested folks, particularly in Montauk, but elsewhere as well. And it's a crucial part of moving forward with any discussion about the future of the airport.
Agreed. I'm aware of how important it is, as our attorneys at Cooley. So I will get right on that and report back to you.
Thank you. Okay. So are you done, Jeff?
I am. Thank you.
Thanks. I have some significant news to announce. The board members may or may not be aware, as this just came out, that as of today, 70% of adults in New York have completed at least 1 vaccine dose per the CDC. The governor had previously stated that after we reach 70%, most of the COVID restrictions will be lifted. And he announced today that we are at that point. So no capacity limits on bars and restaurants or social distancing. Unvaccinated are still in need of wearing masks. There's no size limits on residential indoor gatherings. Performing arts venues under 5,000 capacity have no capacity limit. Movie theaters are at full capacity. Office workers no longer need to social distance and contact tracing. Extra disinfection at certain businesses is no longer required. Businesses can maintain restrictions if they choose, and some of the restrictions made in place for public transportation, healthcare facilities, schools, etc. The governor also mentioned that Long Island did best in terms of vaccination numbers at 74.3% across Long Island, and East Hampton has actually done better than most of Long Island. And I think, again, that's a tribute to the many volunteers who answered my call to put together a local mass vaccination center, which this past Saturday hosted another vaccination clinic in conjunction with East End Pediatrics. And I believe it was another 329 doses of Pfizer were administered. David mentioned earlier in his report that Stony Brook Medicine will be working with the town to have a pop-up clinic in Montauk at the Montauk Playhouse, and that's going to be tomorrow. And it's for anyone over 18 years or older, and that's from 4 to 8 p.m. And that's, again, the Montauk Playhouse, 240 Edgemere Street, Montauk, single dose, J&J. We spoke very briefly about ditch and sand needs there regarding lifeguarding stands, but a more comprehensive sand replenishment is going to be necessary in order for that beach to be functional this summer. We currently are having that beach surveyed to get a good estimate as to how much sand will be necessary to replace that beach profile. It's extremely low, and for the most part, there's no sand covering boulders and debris in the hard pan. It's exposed over a majority of that shoreline. The town does have a multi-year New York State DC permit in place there for that shoreline. It's still valid. It allows for 600 lineal feet of replenishment beginning west of Otis Avenue, continuing to ditch Bathing Beach, and the sand can be placed on land above the mean high water mark, 4 feet, and graded to a slope not greater than 5 to 1. This stabilization is in compliance with the town code and also the New York State Waterfront Revitalization Plan. Again, we're expecting the survey results to come in the next couple of days. In the meantime, we need to prepare, and I'm going to request that the board support a resolution on Thursday to authorize work to bring in the necessary amount of sand. In 2013, it was about 3,500 cubic yards that was necessary after Sandy when the beach was in a similar condition. So I think, upwards of 3,500 cubic yards may be necessary. And there is, we do have access under existing contract for sand that expires on the 27th. After that point, the price goes up. So I think, trying to work quickly and immediately. We also have replenishment needs at the downtown beach that Sylvia mentioned as part of the business recovery committee's discussions. We know that there's a small portion of the bags have become re-exposed after our spring renourishment. We had that nor'easter come through over Memorial Day weekend, which really was causing a number of issues with that stretch. We have some crossovers that are dangling above the beach. We need to fill in sand there. We estimate that something around 2,000 cubic yards. I've spoken to Len Bernard about the funding. He agrees that we should take this money out of surplus. This is exactly what surplus is for and why we've tried to maintain high funds in our surplus, because there are these unforeseen expenses that come up from time to time. And I think it's really important to try to get the beach back in shape before the 4th of July weekend. So I will have a couple of resolutions before the board on Thursday night to approve this work. I wanted the board to know that we had previously authorized the signing of the PPA for the FIP project. I have, signed those documents, which would allow the town to move forward with the sand-only replenishment project at downtown Montauk. The possibility of adding betterments to include ditch plain. Again, we've tried to move up the timeline for that work from 2023 to 2022, that those discussions are still underway. But clearly we need a major sand replenishment to get us to a point in which we're ready to make some longer range plans as proposed in the Hamlet study. ACAC met yesterday evening. There was a presentation by a member who had looked at the beach road ends in Amagansett, primarily Napeague, Indian Wells, and Atlantic Avenue. And there were some recommendations that some work needs to be done there regarding signage, the garbage cans, the bike racks, and some of the fencing adjacent to the road ends. Some of the signage over time has become somewhat haphazard as new issues arise. Obviously, now the COVID signs can be taken down as those restrictions are no longer in place. And that will alleviate some of the visual blight, but there are some other signs that obviously will need to stay. For instance, the handicap signage at the handicap parking spaces. And while we may want to relocate the rip current signs warning beachgoers of the dangers of rip currents to a different location, perhaps on the side where people enter the beach, we've received some comments over time that people like to pull up and have lunch or just have a look to make sure the ocean's still there, and the visual blight at the road end obstructs that beautiful view of the water. So I think, looking at ways to improve the aesthetics there is important, and to maybe convey in a more comprehensive way what the beach rules are, and try to eliminate some of the excess signage is important there. With regards to the garbage cans, the number of garbage cans has increased over time in order to keep up with the capacity of garbage, both from day use. When people come off the beach at the end of the day, we do have regular pickups, but there are beach activities at night when folks come off, having enough capacity in the cans so that animals like raccoons and seagulls in the early morning hours aren't scattering garbage around the road ends. There was a presentation made by Kevin Cooper, our new head of code enforcement. He met with the committee, introduced himself, talked about his efforts since he's arrived. I think people understood very quickly that he's a very gregarious and hardworking individual who really, I think, exemplifies the kind of person we want in that position. He's very personable. He's reached out to the members and encouraged them to call if they have any issues. And I know just that in the short period of time that he's been here, I've gotten a number of really positive reports about his activity. And so that was a helpful discussion. There were some concerns about beach fires, especially in the northern sections of Amagansett. And I've also had complaints as of the last couple of days of beach fires in Northwest, adjacent to woodland areas. And there's concern that they're not properly managed and could get away, that they could cause significant fires within our woodlands. In our weekly enforcement meetings, we'll have a discussion about that as an area of concentration. There are beach regulations for fires. They have to be maintained within a can, and you're not allowed to dump the embers on site. You have a bucket of water with you at all times so that you can extinguish any fire that is either in the can or manages to get beyond. There was some discussion about parking on Windmill Lane due to an event. And I said that I told them that both the events committee and the enforcement are aware of that situation and that we've been assured that that won't occur in the future. But we will continue to monitor that. Under the circumstances, and we talked about doing this ahead of the governor's announcement, I would like to resume in-person town board meetings starting July 6th at the work session, first work session in July. We will continue to have a hybrid form of meeting where members of the public can call in, and we can conduct public hearings in that way as well, provided that the governor continues to extend the open meetings law exceptions for COVID. If that's not extended, then people who want to comment on the record will either have to submit written comments during the appropriate time frame or appear in public. We're going to ask that people pre-register if they want to attend and leave their contact information if they do attend as well, in the event there would be some need to have contact tracing. So with the board's approval on that question, I would like to plan to have in-person meetings on July 6th. The board's.
What do you want to go back to the 10 o'clock, or are we still at the 11 o'clock?
I would prefer, frankly, to keep the timing the same if that's okay with everyone else. I think that gives a little pre-meeting, a little more time pre-meeting to prepare and conduct regular business before we go into a day-long meeting.
I'm supportive. I look forward to in-person meetings.
Yeah, I'm supportive.
I'm okay with it.
So because of COVID and the fact that the hopper was suspended and state funding is not available for the hopper, I still would like to extend this year's contract with the hopper and make up some of the funding shortfalls. I did budget money for the hopper for this year, but again, without the state revenues, we'll be a little bit short. So I'm going to put forward a resolution to have a budget transfer again that would come from surplus. And as Sylvia mentioned earlier, Fred Thiel put out an announcement that his bill for the half percent transfer tax for affordable housing did pass both houses. Now, this was the case previously when it went through the legislature and the governor declined to sign it into law. I had sent a letter last time around. I would ask that the board join me in requesting that the governor sign the bill this time. It's especially given the additional impacts on housing affordability here. It's absolutely crucial that we have additional sources of revenue to deal with this crisis. We've seen how beneficial the funding transfer tax has been for acquiring and preserving open space, and we really need to have such a funding source to aid with our housing affordability crisis. So we'll prepare a letter, and I ask that you support that. We'll send it off to the governor.
Peter, does that mean the hopper will be running for the season?
So we would have to engage with the hopper. It's allowed to be extended upon signing by both parties. My intention would be to continue the hopper this year as it had been scheduled previous to COVID. Again, I spoke with the principal, Derek Kleinow, about this. And again, it would require the board's support as well for the effort. I think we're going to have an extremely busy summer. And I think any way that we can continue to reduce vehicle trips, especially in downtown, alleviate some of the parking congestion and road vehicles on the highway, that we should be doing what we can do. This is one way that we could address that need. I think it was widely supported, when I first proposed having the shuttle, and it's had quite a few riders. I think we were something over 50,000 riders a year, if I recall. So
it has been discussed at the Montauk CAC, and it's something that they support and I would support also. So thank you very much for getting that back. It's good foresight because it is going to be a busy summer.
Yeah, it's also been discussed at the Business Recovery Group. They would also like to see the Hampton hopper back. So I'm I know they'll be ecstatic to hear this news tomorrow.
So
And-
Dave, speaking of, since we're talking about parking and alleviating vehicle trips and parking issues, I know you had, as the liaison to Montauk, echoed the interest in reducing that Kirk Park lot fee to $35. I just wanted to revisit that with the board members. I think, you know, the members there in Montauk were interested in having it reflect the prices that we had last year. They think that there's already some spillover due to maybe sticker shock there.
That is correct. The Montauk CAC for the last 2 months have been pretty strong on their recommendations through their beach advisory committee or just the member support to decrease the paid parking at Kirk Park back to $35, where they felt it was successful last year. They feel that with the $50 and in discussions with others that have been watching the lot anecdotally, that individuals are now not parking there, parking in other locations of the hamlet or in residential areas. And as we're sort of diverting, or our diversionary study of parking is going to other areas that shouldn't be. So I think I'm supportive of the decrease of $35 for that lot specifically. I think it's appropriate, and keeping $50 at Atlantic Ave. But again, it has to be done by town board resolution.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
I support the 35, the reduction.
I do as well. So we'll put on a resolution Thursday to change that fee.
I do think that they may have, consequences here. If you have $50 in Amagansett and $35 in Montauk, you're pushing people down to Montauk. So you may be adding to more people there. So just, you know.
It's possible. Again, this is something we can change by resolution, but I would say.
But the timing is different. I mean, we haven't, anyway, so I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point. And I think the fact that some of the folks in Montauk have been kind of monitoring this, think that this will help. We'll give it a shot and see. And again, it can change by resolution. So.
Yeah, I know. I hate to go back and forth all season long, though. So anyway.
I'm okay with the lower. I think it makes sense to reduce it.
Okay, very good. I appreciate the support on that. And David, thanks for bringing that to our attention. And
I'll draft the resolution, just not to double up on work. I'll get that set. So thank you.
I appreciate that.
Can I just go back to the sand replenishment for the downtown beaches and for Dick?
Sorry, can you? Your audio's acting up a little. Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to go back to the sand replenishment for this season. It's been surveyed and we need to plan because of the storms down at downtown Montauk, and that we have a contract in place. If the rate is good through June 27th. Do we have confirmation from the contractor that they have sand available and that they can get it in this month? Is that is there like?
Yeah, we're working on that. So there is a limited amount of the sand at that lower rate that's stockpiled. So we're not going to be able to fulfill all of our needs, but it's very much compatible with what's already on the beach in downtown. And I would suggest that we start that sand at that location first, so it's compatible, and then have as much of that sand that we can brought to ditch, and supplement with whatever other quarried sand is available.
Is there a window that they are?
Yeah, so I had an on-site meeting with Kim Shaw and also with our buildings and grounds, and discussed this with the contractors. The window's going to be looking at end of next week into the week after, which puts us right before July 4th weekend. It's going to happen within the next 10 days. Ditch would be a 3 to 4 day process potentially. Downtown Montauk would be within the same mobilization period also. But yes, that is that's if everything goes well, weather dependent.
Yeah, and let's hope we're done with nor'easters for this year until.
And the good thing is that the surf looks low right now. The surf and the weather looks good, and there is a little bit of an accretion onto the beach, but the areas where we're discussing for the beach replenishment right now just will not get any sand naturally right now, not through wind or anything. So I think it's a very wise move of this board to move forward and make sure our economic engine of our beaches is sustained for this season.
Okay, well, we do have some few resolutions. Kathy, I believe yours is first.
I do. It's resolution 2021-710. It's approval of the special event permit for the Clamshell Foundation, their 39th annual fireworks show at 3 Mile Harbor. It's Saturday, this July 17th. It should say, 2021. So at 9:30 to 9:45. So I ask you to, as amended.
Second as amended.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passed and carried.
I'd like to offer resolution 2021-711. A little bit funny about it. Authorize payment outstanding for 2020 invoice for Kyocera. This was via the town clerk's office. This, I believe, for $29.30.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passed and carried. Resolution 2021-712 is to retain Whiteman, Osterman, Hannah LLP. This is regarding a motion of contempt. Resolved that Alan J. Goldberg Esquire and John Henry Esquire with the firm of Whiteman, Osterman, Hannah LLP is hereby retained to assist the town in response to orders of cause in the matter entitled Seaview at Amagansett LTD et al. Versus the trustees of theory holders and the commonality of the town of East Hampton. Be further resolved that they shall be paid at a rate of $320 an hour.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passed and carried. I will entertain a motion to go into executive session.
I just have one last comment, if you don't mind, Peter.
Sure, absolutely.
I just wanted to, just by today is the date, Peter, I just want to wish you a happy birthday.
Thank you, David.
Happy birthday.
And since you brought it up, I want to thank all the kind well wishes that I've received today on Facebook and text message and phone call. It's really, really nice of everyone. So I will entertain a motion to go into executive session at 3:15. Does that work for everyone?
I move to enter into an exec session to discuss the acquisition of real property, discuss personnel in the planning and finance departments and the town clerk's office, and to receive advice of counsel.
What, no birthday cake?
Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passed and carried. Stay safe, be well, everyone, and we will send you the link momentarily.